The moment I heard my own father-in-law announce my replacement, time stopped. 3 years of sacrifice, 60-hour weeks, and unwavering loyalty, all erased in a single sentence. I'm proud to announce Lily Carter as our new regional director. The applause felt like knives. That was the day I learned that family could be your greatest enemy, and sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply walking away. But this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about discovering your own worth when everyone else has forgotten it. If you want to see how far a woman can rise when she stops playing by other people's rules, stay with me until the end. And comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, all the signs were there glaring at me like neon warnings I was too loyal to read. But when you've spent 3 years bleeding for a company, when you've sacrificed weekends, missed family dinners, and turned down every headhunter who called with promises of greener pastures, you develop a dangerous kind of blindness. You start believing that loyalty matters, that hard work speaks louder than politics, that fairness exists in corporate America. I was wrong about all of it. My name is Amy Carter, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most willing to stab you in the back. It's also the story of how that betrayal became the greatest gift I never knew I needed. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday at Alden Ventures. I arrived at 6:30 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to tackle another day of building someone else's empire. The San Francisco office was still quiet, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bay. This was my sanctuary, the place where I'd proven myself over and over again, where I'd transformed our West Coast operations from a struggling satellite office into the company's most profitable division. I loved those early morning hours when the office belonged to me, just me, my computer, and the endless spreadsheets that told the story of our success, a success I'd orchestrated deal by deal, client by client, crisis by crisis. The revenue numbers were beautiful: 340% growth over 3 years, client retention at 94%, and a pipeline so robust that our New York headquarters had started treating us like the golden child instead of the red-headed stepchild we'd been when I arrived. Arthur Carter, my father-in-law and the CEO of Alden Ventures, had recruited me personally. I still remember that conversation like it was yesterday. Joseph and I had been married for 2 years, and I was climbing the corporate ladder at a mid-tier consulting firm, making decent money but feeling unfulfilled. Arthur approached me at our Christmas dinner, his eyes sparkling with what I thought was genuine opportunity. "Amy," he'd said, pulling me aside while Joseph helped his mother in the kitchen, "I've been watching you. The way you think, the way you solve problems, it's exactly what Alden Ventures needs on the West Coast. We're opening a new division, and I want you to run it." I'd been flattered, excited, and admittedly a little nervous about mixing family with business. But Arthur had been persuasive, painting a picture of unlimited growth potential, of building something from the ground up, of having the kind of autonomy that corporate environments rarely offered. "Think of it as your own company," he'd said. "You'll have complete control over operations, hiring, strategy, everything. And when you prove yourself, and I know you will, you'll be first in line for the regional director position when Harrison retires." Harrison Mitchell had been the regional director for 15 years, a old-school executive who was counting down the days to his Florida retirement. Arthur made it clear that Harrison's departure was just a matter of time, and when it happened, the position would be mine. That promise had sustained me through 3 years of 18-hour days, through the stress of launching a new division, through the loneliness of building a team from scratch while being 3,000 miles away from the company's power center. Every late night, every missed anniversary dinner, every weekend I spent at the office instead of with Joseph, it was all an investment in a future that Arthur had painted for me in vivid detail. I delivered beyond anyone's expectations. Our client list read like a who's who of Silicon Valley tech startups that had grown into unicorns, established companies looking to innovate, venture capital firms seeking strategic guidance. I'd personally landed Daniel Morrison, the CEO of Horizon Tech, one of the fastest growing companies in the Bay Area. That single relationship had brought in over $2 million in revenue. But it wasn't just about the money. I'd built something meaningful, a team of 12 brilliant consultants who respected my leadership, a company culture that valued innovation over politics, and a reputation in the industry that opened doors I'd never imagined walking through. Headhunters called me weekly, and I always gave them the same answer: thanks, but I'm exactly where I want to be. The morning of March 15th, I was reviewing our Q1 numbers when my assistant, Jennifer, knocked on my office door. Her expression was strange, excited but nervous, like she was carrying news she wasn't sure how to deliver. Amy Arthur wants to see you in the conference room at 9 a.m. Boss, she said. He flew in from New York last night. My heart skipped. Arthur rarely made unscheduled trips to the West Coast, and when he did, it usually meant big news. Harrison had been dropping hints about his retirement timeline, and I'd noticed him cleaning out his office the previous week. This had to be it, the moment I'd been working toward for 3 years. I spent the next hour polishing my presentation materials, reviewing our performance metrics, and mentally preparing for the conversation I'd been rehearsing in my head for months. I had ideas, big ideas about how to expand our operations, how to leverage our success into new markets, how to double our revenue again in the next 3 years. I was ready. The conference room was fuller than I'd expected when I arrived. Arthur was there, of course, looking distinguished in his navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. Harrison sat beside him, looking relaxed in a way I'd never seen before, the contentment of a man who'd made his decision and was at peace with it. Jennifer was there with her notepad ready to take minutes, and then there was someone I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe 25 or 26, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed Ivy League MBA. Blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and an air of confidence that only comes from never having to prove yourself. She was sitting in the chair I usually occupied during meetings, the one with the best view of Arthur's presentation screen. Amy. Arthur stood as I entered, his arms spread wide in that performative warmth he'd perfected over decades of corporate leadership. Come in, come in. I want you to meet someone very special. The blonde woman stood extending a manicured hand with a smile that was magazine perfect and somehow completely empty. You must be Amy. I've heard so much about you. I'm Lily Carter. Carter. The name hit me like ice water. Lily is my niece, Arthur continued, his voice filled with pride. Marcus's daughter. She just finished her MBA at Wharton, and I've convinced her to join our little family business. I shook her hand, my mind racing. Marcus was Arthur's younger brother, the one who'd never shown any interest in the business, who'd made his fortune in real estate and lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, playing golf and attending charity galas. I'd met him exactly twice in the 5 years I'd been married to Joseph, and he'd struck me as the kind of man who thought business was something other people did while he enjoyed the fruits of inherited wealth. It's wonderful to meet you, Lily. I managed my voice steady despite the growing unease in my chest. What brings you to the West Coast? Arthur clapped his hands together, practically vibrating with excitement. Well, that's exactly what we're here to discuss. Please, everyone, sit down. I took my usual seat across from Arthur while Lily returned to what I was beginning to think of as my chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, but I pushed the paranoid thoughts away. This was probably just Arthur introducing a new team member, maybe someone to help with our expansion plans. As you all know, Arthur began clicking to his first slide. Harrison has decided to embrace the next chapter of his life. The slide showed a beach scene with Happy Retirement Harrison in bold letters. After 15 wonderful years as our regional director, he'll be transitioning to emeritus status effective immediately. Harrison nodded, his smile genuine. It's been an incredible journey, but Meredith and I are ready for some adventures that don't involve quarterly reports. Everyone chuckled, but my attention was focused entirely on Arthur. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. Now, Arthur continued. The question becomes, who's ready to step into Harrison's considerable shoes? He paused dramatically, his eyes scanning the room. This position requires someone with vision, someone with fresh ideas, someone who understands both the traditional values that built this company and the innovative thinking that will carry us into the future. I sat straighter, my hands folded in my lap, ready to accept the role I'd earned through 3 years of excellence. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that Lily Carter will be our new regional director effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush, my heart rate spike, my carefully maintained composure crack like glass. Around the table, Jennifer was writing furiously in her notepad. Harrison was nodding approvingly, and Lily was accepting congratulations with the gracious smile of someone who'd never doubted this moment would come. Amy, Arthur's voice seemed to come from very far away. I hope you'll help Lily get up to speed. Your experience here has been invaluable, and I know you'll be a tremendous resource as she transitions into leadership. The applause started then. Jennifer clapping enthusiastically, Harrison offering his congratulations, Arthur beaming with paternal pride. And there I was, expected to join in, expected to celebrate the moment. My future was handed to someone who'd been with the company for exactly how long have you been with Alden Ventures? Lily, I heard myself ask, my voice unnaturally calm. Oh, just about 2 months, she replied brightly. I started in New York right after graduation, but Arthur thought I'd learn more on the ground here in California. 2 months. 2 months versus 3 years. Fresh MBA versus proven results. Family blood versus family by marriage. The mathematics of corporate nepotism had never been clearer. I somehow managed to find my voice to make the appropriate responses, to shake Lily's hand again and offer my congratulations. I heard myself saying something about being happy to help with the transition, about the team, being excited to work with fresh leadership, about the bright future ahead for our division. But inside, I was drowning. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Arthur outlined Lily's background, summa cum laude from Princeton undergrad, 2 years at Goldman Sachs as an analyst, then Wharton for her MBA, where she'd focused on strategic management and organizational behavior. On paper, she was impressive. In reality, she was a 26-year-old with no actual management experience being handed control of a $50 million operation. Arthur discussed transition plans, mentioning that Harrison would stay on for 2 weeks to help Lily get oriented. He talked about new initiatives, fresh perspectives, and the importance of bringing next-generation thinking to our client relationships. He never once mentioned my role in building those client relationships, my track record of success, or the fact that I'd been explicitly promised this promotion. When the meeting finally ended, I managed to escape to my office without completely losing my composure. I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and stared out at the San Francisco Bay, trying to process what had just happened. 3 years. 3 years of my life poured into this company like water into sand. I'd given up job opportunities, social obligations, personal time, all for the promise of this moment. And in less than an hour, that promise had been transferred to someone who'd barely learned where the bathrooms were located. My phone buzzed with a text from Joseph. How did the meeting go? Are we celebrating tonight? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, it didn't go as expected. I'll call you later. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I attended my scheduled client calls, reviewed project proposals, and answered emails with the same professionalism I'd maintained for 3 years. But underneath it all, a cold fury was building, the kind of anger that doesn't explode but burns steadily, feeding on itself, growing stronger with each breath. Around 3 p.m., I heard voices outside my office, Arthur and Lily conducting what sounded like a tour. I could hear Arthur explaining our operations, introducing her to team members, showing her the systems I'd built and the processes I'd refined, my life's work being handed over like a set of keys to a rental car. Amy really has done wonderful work here, I heard Arthur say as they passed my door. She's very reliable, dependable. You know exactly what you're going to get with her. Reliable, dependable. The words felt like slaps. In corporate speak, they were often code for unambitious, yet uninspiring, this safe, the kind of person you could count on to maintain the status quo, but never to push boundaries or challenge conventions. I'd built this division from nothing. I'd increased revenue by 340%. I'd developed client relationships that competitors tried desperately to poach, and I was reliable. The afternoon dragged on, each hour feeling like a week. I found myself analyzing every interaction I'd had with Arthur over the past 3 years, looking for signs I'd missed, hints that I was never really in the running for promotion. Had he always planned to give the job to family? Had my work, my sacrifice, my loyalty, had any of it mattered? At 6 p.m., long after most of the office had emptied, I was still at my desk, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. That's when Arthur knocked on my door. Amy, do you have a minute? I looked up to find him standing in my doorway, his expression earnest and concerned. Behind him, the office was dark except for the security lights, and I realized I'd been sitting in the growing darkness of my own office for the past hour. Of course, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Come in. He settled himself, carefully adjusting his tie in the way he always did when he was preparing to say something he thought was important. I wanted to talk to you about today. I know the announcement might have come as a surprise, as if I'd been expecting anything other than the promotion I'd been explicitly promised. I appreciate you taking the time, I said carefully. Amy, I want you to know how much I value everything you've done here. You've built something remarkable, and the company is stronger because of your contributions. And I nodded, waiting for the but that was inevitably coming. But I also think it's important for you to understand the bigger picture. This business is evolving rapidly, and we need leadership that can navigate the changing landscape. Lily brings fresh perspectives, new ideas, connections in the industry that will serve us well moving forward. What connections? I asked, genuinely curious. She's been out of school for 2 months. Arthur shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the direct question. Well, her connections from Goldman, her Wharton network, these relationships take time to develop, and having them early gives us advantages. I almost laughed. Goldman Sachs analysts were notorious for working 100-hour weeks with no time to network, and her Wharton network consisted of other recent graduates who were probably drowning in their own entry-level positions. But pointing this out would only make me look petty. I see, I said instead. And frankly, Arthur continued, his voice taking on a slightly patronizing tone, I think this could be a great opportunity for you too. You've been carrying a tremendous load here, and now you'll have support. You can focus on what you do best, the day-to-day operations, client management, the detail work that keeps everything running smoothly. The detail work, as if strategic planning, business development, and team leadership were somehow beyond my capabilities. Arthur, I said slowly, when you recruited me 3 years ago, you promised me this position when Harrison retired. You said it explicitly. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I know, and at the time that was certainly the plan. But circumstances change, Amy. The business landscape is different now than it was 3 years ago. We need to be strategic about our leadership choices. And you don't think I'm strategic. Of course you are. But Amy, let's be honest, you're at a different point in your career than Lily. You're settled, you have stability, you know what you're good at. Lily has that hunger, that drive to prove herself. Sometimes fresh blood is exactly what an organization needs. Fresh blood. At 42, apparently, I was past my expiration date. I understand, I said, though I understood nothing except that I'd been naive to believe in promises from family. Arthur smiled, clearly relieved that I wasn't making a scene. I knew you'd be professional about this. That's what I've always appreciated about you, Amy. You're predictable in the best possible way. Predictable. There was that word again. I hope you'll give Lily your full support during this transition, he continued. She's going to need someone with your experience to help her find her footing. Of course, I replied automatically. Arthur stood straightening his jacket. Excellent. I'm flying back to New York tomorrow, but I'll be checking in regularly to see how things are progressing. And Amy, thank you for everything. After he left, I sat in my dark office for another hour processing the conversation and what it revealed about my future at Alden Ventures. I wasn't just being passed over for promotion, I was being repositioned as a supporting player in my own success story. The woman who'd built the empire was being asked to serve the princess who'd inherited it. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Joseph. Getting worried, everything okay? I looked at the message for a long time before calling him. Amy, thank God, he answered immediately. I've been imagining all sorts of scenarios. How did it go? Are you the new regional director? No, I said simply, silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean, no, Dad promised you? Your father gave the job to Lily. Lily? Who the hell is Lily? Your cousin, Marcus's daughter. She's been with the company for 2 months. The silence that followed was different this time, not confusion, but fury building like a storm. 2 months. Joseph's voice was dangerously quiet. He gave your job to someone who's been there for 2 months. Apparently, she brings fresh perspectives and new connections. Amy, this is insane. You built that division. You made them millions of dollars. You've worked yourself to death for 3 years based on his promise. I could hear him pacing the way he always did when he was angry. Joseph was a gentle man by nature, slow to anger, but when something truly outraged him, his fury was spectacular. I'm calling him, he said. This is wrong, Amy. This is so fundamentally wrong that— No, I interrupted. Don't call him. Why not? This is family, Amy. This is my father screwing over my wife for some entitled kid who probably can't even read a P&L statement. Because, I said, my voice steadying as a cold clarity settled over me, it wouldn't change anything. And because I'm beginning to think this might be the best thing that could have happened to me. What do you mean? I stood up, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. I mean that maybe it's time I stopped being predictable. The drive home that night was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. As I navigated the familiar streets from my office to our house in Pacific Heights, I found myself seeing everything differently. The city I'd worked so hard to conquer suddenly felt less like home and more like a stepping stone. The future I'd planned so carefully was dissolving, but instead of panic, I felt something unexpected relief. For 3 years, I'd been chasing someone else's vision of success. I'd built Arthur's empire, strengthened his family's legacy, and enriched his shareholders. I'd been so focused on earning their approval, their recognition, their promises, that I'd forgotten to ask myself what I actually wanted. Joseph was waiting for me when I got home, 2 glasses of wine poured, and his laptop open on the kitchen counter. He'd clearly been researching, probably looking up employment law or corporate governance or whatever he thought might help us fight this decision. How are you feeling? He asked, wrapping me in a hug that felt like the first genuinely comforting thing that had happened all day. Honestly, I'm not sure yet, I admitted. Angry, obviously, disappointed, but also, I don't know. There's something else. Tell me. I sank into the couch beside him, accepting the wine and taking a long sip before answering. Joseph, have you ever felt like you've been living someone else's life? He considered this seriously. What do you mean? I mean, for 3 years I've been working toward Arthur's vision of my future. His plan, his timeline, his definition of success. I've been so focused on proving myself worthy of his approval that I never stopped to ask whether I actually wanted what he was offering. And do you want it, I mean? I thought about Lily sitting in my conference room chair, accepting congratulations for a job I'd earned. I thought about Arthur's words, reliable, dependable, predictable. I thought about the years stretching ahead, training my replacement, supporting someone else's authority, playing second fiddle in the symphony I'd composed. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I don't think I do. Joseph raised an eyebrow. So, what do you want? It was a simple question with a complex answer. What did I want? For 3 years, I'd known exactly the regional director position, the respect that came with it, the security of being family. But now, with that future erased, I found myself considering possibilities I'd been too focused to see before. I want to build something that's actually mine, I said slowly. I want to work with people who value what I bring to the table, not because they have to, but because they choose to. I want to stop being grateful for opportunities and start creating them. Joseph smiled, and I realized he'd been waiting for me to reach this conclusion. So what's your plan? I don't have one yet, I admitted, but I think that's okay. For the first time in 3 years, I'm going to make decisions based on what I want, not what other people expect from me. That night, I lay awake thinking about the conversation I'd overheard between Arthur and Lily, the casual dismissal of my work as merely reliable. I thought about the clients I'd landed, the team I'd built, the reputation I'd established in the industry. All of that was mine, regardless of what title Arthur chose to give me. Somewhere around 2 a.m., as Joseph slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop being predictable. I was going to stop being reliable in the way Arthur expected, and I was going to show him exactly what he'd lost when he chose family politics over merit. But first, I was going to make sure I understood exactly what kind of family I'd been working for. The next morning, I arrived at the office early as usual, but this time with a different purpose. Instead of diving into my normal routine, I spent the first hour researching Lily Carter, LinkedIn company databases, industry publications. I wanted to understand exactly who had been chosen over me. What I found was both better and worse than I'd expected. Better because Lily's qualifications were even thinner than I'd thought. Her Goldman experience was in retail banking, not consulting, and her MBA thesis was on organizational culture in family businesses. Worse because it became clear that this decision had been planned for months, possibly years. There were email threads. I hadn't been included in meetings. I hadn't been invited to conversations about succession planning and next generation leadership that had apparently been happening while I was busy building the very success that should have secured my promotion. Arthur had been grooming Lily for this role since before she'd even started her MBA. The 2 months she'd spent in New York weren't orientation. They were advanced preparation for taking over my division. I hadn't lost a fair competition. I'd never even been allowed to compete. The realization was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't about my performance, my qualifications, or my potential. This was about family politics, pure and simple. Arthur had decided that blood mattered more than results, and nothing I could have done would have changed that outcome. At 9 a.m., I had my first scheduled meeting with Lily. She arrived precisely on time, notepad in hand, wearing another designer suit that probably cost more than most of my team made in a week. "Amy, thank you so much for making time for this," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Arthur suggested we start with an overview of current operations." "Of course," I replied, pulling up the presentation I'd prepared. "I thought we'd begin with our client portfolio, then move through our service offerings, team structure, and growth initiatives." For the next 2 hours, I walked Lily through 3 years of my life's work. She took notes diligently, asked occasional questions, and nodded at appropriate intervals. But it was clear that she was struggling to grasp the complexity of what she'd inherited. "So when you say client relationship management," she asked at one point, "are you talking about account maintenance or strategic partnership development?" The question revealed both her inexperience and her business school vocabulary. In theory, she understood the concepts. In practice, she had no idea what it meant to build a relationship with a client like Daniel Morrison, to understand their business challenges, to develop solutions that created mutual value. Both, I answered patiently. Our clients aren't just accounts, they're partners. We understand their industries, their competitive pressures, their growth objectives. That understanding allows us to provide strategic value, not just tactical support. She nodded as if this made perfect sense, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was smart. Arthur wouldn't have chosen her if she weren't, but intelligence and experience were different things entirely. And the team, she continued, referring to her notes. Arthur mentioned that you've built a strong culture here. What would you say are the key elements of that culture? It was a good question, the kind that showed she'd been coached on what to ask, but her tone was that of someone conducting an interview rather than someone genuinely seeking to understand the environment she'd be leading. Trusts, I said simply. Our team knows that I support them, that I'll fight for their professional development, and that their success contributes to everyone's success. They also know that I expect excellence, not just effort. How do you measure excellence? Another textbook question. Results, I said. Client satisfaction, revenue growth, team retention, industry recognition. The metrics matter, but they're the outcome of doing the right things consistently over time. Lily scribbled furiously, trying to capture wisdom that couldn't really be taught in a 2-hour briefing. I found myself feeling almost sorry for her. She was being set up to fail, thrown into a leadership role she wasn't prepared for, expected to manage a team that had been built around my leadership style and vision. But my sympathy was limited. She'd accepted this position knowing she wasn't qualified, knowing someone else deserved it, knowing that family connections were the only reason she was sitting in my conference room instead of earning her stripes in some entry-level position. One more question, she said, as our meeting wrapped up. Arthur mentioned that you might have some thoughts about strategic direction for the next year. I'd love to hear your perspective. I almost laughed. She wanted me to give her the roadmap for my own succession, the strategic thinking that would make her look like a visionary leader to Arthur in the New York office. I think the most important thing is to understand our clients' evolving needs, I said carefully. The market is changing rapidly, and our value proposition needs to evolve with it, but strategy should be based on deep market knowledge and client feedback, not just theoretical frameworks. It was a diplomatic non-answer, and she was smart enough to recognize it as such. But she smiled and thanked me for my time, promising to schedule regular check-ins as she got up to speed. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation and what it revealed about the next few months. Lily was going to struggle, and Arthur would expect me to help her succeed. I would be asked to ghostwrite her strategies, to smooth her client relationships, to essentially do her job while she got credit for the results. The thought made me physically ill. Around noon, I received an email that would change everything. It was from Daniel Morrison, the CEO of Horizon Tech and my most important client. The subject line was simple, quick question. Amy, the email read, I heard through the grapevine that there might be some leadership changes at Alden Ventures. Just wanted to confirm that you'll still be my main point of contact. Our relationship with your company is really our relationship with you, and I want to make sure we're on the same page moving forward. Give me a call when you have a chance. Daniel. I stared at the email for a long time, understanding the subtext immediately. Daniel had heard about Lily's promotion, probably through one of his industry connections, and he was concerned. Horizon Tech generated nearly $2 million in annual revenue for us, and Daniel was making it clear that this business was tied to me personally, not to Alden Ventures as a company. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since yesterday's meeting. This was my leverage, my opportunity, my chance to stop being predictable. Instead of calling Daniel immediately, I decided to do some research first. I spent the next hour reaching out to contacts throughout the industry, making casual inquiries about job opportunities, testing the waters to see what possibilities might exist beyond Alden Ventures. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 hours, I had 3 different headhunters calling me back, 2 former colleagues suggesting lunch meetings, and one direct inquiry from a competitor who'd apparently been hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity. But the most interesting call came from an unexpected source, Margaret Chen, the Chief Operating Officer at Horizon Tech. "Amy," she said, "Daniel mentioned that you might be exploring new opportunities. I don't know if you'd be interested, but we've been talking about bringing our consulting function in-house. If you ever wanted to discuss what that might look like, I'd love to buy you coffee." In-house consulting. It was something I'd considered before but never seriously pursued. The idea of working directly for a client, of being part of their strategic decision-making rather than an outside advisor, had always appealed to me. And Horizon Tech was exactly the kind of innovative, growth-oriented company where I could build something truly significant. "I'd be very interested in that conversation," I told Margaret. "When works for you," we scheduled coffee for the following afternoon, and I hung up the phone feeling energized for the first time since Arthur's announcement. For 3 years, I'd been waiting for someone else to determine my future. Now, for the first time, I was actively creating it. But first, I had one more conversation to finish. I called Daniel Morrison directly. "Amy," he answered immediately. "Thanks for calling back so quickly. So what's the story? Are you still going to be taking care of us?" "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you, Daniel. There have been some leadership changes, and I wanted to make sure you heard about them directly from me rather than through industry gossip." "I appreciate that. What's happening?" "Arthur has promoted his niece Lily Carter to regional director. She'll officially be overseeing all West Coast operations, including the Horizon Tech relationship." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Arthur's niece," Daniel said finally, "and her qualifications are MBA from Wharton, 2 years at Goldman Sachs, 2 months with Alden Ventures." Another pause, longer this time. "Amy, I'm going to be direct with you because we've built a relationship based on honesty. I don't give a damn about Arthur's family politics. Horizon Tech works with Alden Ventures because of the value you provide, your strategic thinking, your understanding of our business, your ability to solve problems before they become crises. If you're not going to be leading our relationship, then we need to have a different conversation." This was the moment of truth, the decision that would determine everything that came next. I could reassure Daniel that I'd still be heavily involved, that Lily would learn quickly, that the transition would be seamless. I could protect Alden Ventures' largest client relationship and prove my loyalty one more time, or I could tell the truth. "Daniel, I'm honored by your confidence in me, and I want you to know that whatever changes come, I'll always be committed to Horizon Tech's success. But I think you should know that I'm beginning to explore other opportunities." "Other opportunities? Are you saying you might leave Alden Ventures?" "I'm saying that I'm not sure my future is with a company that values family connections over performance." Daniel was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him thinking. "Amy, would you be interested in having lunch this week? Not about business, just a conversation between friends." "I'd like that very much." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't asking for permission or waiting for approval. I was making decisions based on my own interests, my own values, my own vision of success. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The rest of that day was surreal. I went through the motions of my normal routine: client calls, team meetings, administrative tasks, but underneath it all, I was mentally preparing for a future that no longer included Alden Ventures. Every interaction felt different when viewed through the lens of departure rather than permanence. At 4 p.m., I had a team meeting to introduce Lily to our department heads. Watching her try to command respect from people who'd been following my leadership for years was both painful and enlightening. She used all the right business school terminology, asked thoughtful questions, and presented herself professionally. But leadership isn't about vocabulary or presentation skills. It's about earning trust, demonstrating competence, and inspiring confidence. Lily had none of those things, and the team knew it. After the meeting, my senior consultant, Marcus Webb, stopped by my office. "Amy, can I speak frankly?" "Always." "What the hell is happening here?" "Arthur brings in some kid to run the division you built, and we're supposed to pretend that makes sense." Marcus had been with me since the beginning, one of my first hires when we launched the West Coast operation. He was brilliant, ambitious, and completely loyal, exactly the kind of person any leader would want on their team. "It's a transition, Marcus. Lily brings fresh perspectives that Arthur thinks will benefit the company." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Amy, with all due respect, that's corporate bullshit, and we both know it. This is nepotism, pure and simple, and if you're not going to fight it, then maybe it's time for some of us to consider other options." The threat was implicit but clear. If I left, I wouldn't be leaving alone. The team I'd built, the relationships I'd cultivated, the institutional knowledge I'd developed, all of it would walk out the door with me. "I appreciate your loyalty, Marcus, but I need you to give Lily a fair chance. She's smart, she's motivated, and she deserves the opportunity to prove herself." Marcus nodded, but his expression made it clear that he saw through my diplomatic language. "Of course. But Amy, if you ever decide to do something different, to start something new, you should know that you wouldn't be doing it alone." And that evening I went home and told Joseph about my conversations with Daniel Morrison and Margaret Chen. I also told him about my growing certainty that my future lay somewhere other than Alden Ventures. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "For what?" "For finally putting yourself first. For the past 3 years, you've been trying to earn my father's approval to prove yourself worthy of a family that should have welcomed you from the beginning. But you don't need their approval, Amy. You never did." That night, I began drafting my resignation letter, not because I'd made a final decision, but because I wanted to understand what it would feel like to have that option. I wanted to know what words I would choose, what tone I would strike, what message I wanted to send. The letter wrote itself, "Dear Arthur, after careful consideration, I have decided to resign from my position at Alden Ventures effective 2 weeks from today's date. This was not an easy decision, but I believe it is the right one for both me and the company. Recent organizational changes have made it clear that my vision for my career is not aligned with the direction Alden Ventures is taking. I am committed to ensuring a smooth transition and will do everything possible to transfer my responsibilities and client relationships to the appropriate team members. Thank you for the opportunity to build the West Coast division. I am proud of what we accomplished together and wish the company continued success. Sincerely, Amy Carter." It was professional, cordial, and completely nonspecific about my reasons for leaving. It said everything and nothing, which felt exactly right for a situation that was both deeply personal and entirely political. I didn't send the letter that night. Instead, I saved it as a draft and went to bed feeling lighter than I had in months. Having an exit strategy, even a theoretical one, was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Tomorrow I would meet with Margaret Chen and explore possibilities I'd never seriously considered. Tomorrow I would begin actively creating my future instead of waiting for someone else to determine it. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep without thinking about quarterly reports, client proposals, or Arthur's expectations. Tonight I fell asleep thinking about possibilities. The coffee meeting with Margaret Chen changed everything. We met at a small cafe in Soma, away from the corporate towers where industry gossip traveled faster than elevator news. Margaret arrived exactly on time, carrying herself with the confident efficiency I'd always admired about Horizon Tech's leadership team. "Amy, thank you for making time for this," she said, settling into the corner booth I'd chosen for privacy. "I have to admit, when Daniel mentioned you might be exploring new opportunities, my first thought was, finally." "Finally," Margaret smiled, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "We've been working together for, 18 months now. In that time, I've watched you solve problems that our internal team couldn't even identify, let alone address. You've saved us millions in avoided mistakes and generated millions more in new opportunities. Every time we have a strategic challenge, Daniel's first question is, "What does Amy think?" The compliment felt like water in a desert after yesterday's meeting with Arthur and Lily. "That's very kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's fact. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk with you." Margaret leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. "Horizon Tech is at an inflection point. We're growing faster than we ever imagined, but that growth is creating complexities that we're not equipped to handle internally. We need strategic thinking, operational excellence, and the kind of wisdom that only comes from experience." I could feel my pulse quickening, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We want to create a new position, Director of Strategic Operations. It would be a senior leadership role reporting directly to Daniel with responsibility for operational strategy, process optimization, and strategic planning. Essentially, we'd be bringing you in-house to do what you've been doing for us as a consultant, but with full authority and unlimited scope." The offer was intoxicating, everything I'd been doing at Alden Ventures, but for a single client who valued my contributions with leadership, that respected my expertise, and without the politics that had just derailed my career. "What kind of timeline are you thinking about?" I asked. "Honestly, yesterday. But realistically, we'd want you to start as soon as possible." Daniel's exact words were, "Whatever it takes to get Amy on our team." We spent the next hour discussing details, compensation benefits, team structure, reporting relationships. The package they were offering was generous beyond anything I'd expected: a 30% salary increase, equity participation, and complete autonomy over strategic operations. But more than the money, what appealed to me was the opportunity to build something from the ground up in an environment where merit mattered more than politics. "There's one more thing," Margaret said as our meeting was winding down. "Daniel wanted me to make something clear. This offer has nothing to do with your current situation at Alden Ventures. We've been discussing this possibility for months, ever since you helped us navigate the Patterson acquisition. Your consulting contract just gave us the excuse to finally make the call." The Patterson acquisition. 6 months ago, when Horizon Tech was considering acquiring a smaller competitor, they'd asked Alden Ventures to provide strategic guidance on the deal structure. I'd spent 3 weeks embedded with their team, working 18-hour days to analyze financials, assess cultural fit, and develop integration strategies. The acquisition had been a massive success, adding 50 million in annual revenue and positioning Horizon Tech as a market leader in their sector. Arthur had taken credit for the strategic insight naturally. The success story became part of his presentations to the New York board, evidence of Alden Ventures' sophisticated capabilities. But Daniel and Margaret knew who had actually done the work. "I'm very interested," I told Margaret, "but I need some time to think it through. This would be a significant career change." "Of course. Take all the time you need, but Amy, don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often, and we're not the only company that's noticed your talents." I walked back to my office in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. For 3 years, I'd been fighting for recognition within Arthur's system, trying to prove myself worthy of advancement in his company. Now suddenly I had the opportunity to leap past everything I'd been working toward to join a company that had already seen my value and wanted to invest in my success. But first, I had to navigate the increasingly surreal dynamics at Alden Ventures. When I returned to the office, I found Lily in my conference room with 3 of my senior consultants, conducting what appeared to be an informal interview session. Through the glass walls, I could see her taking notes while Marcus Webb answered questions with the kind of polite patience that barely concealed frustration. Jennifer appeared at my elbow, her expression troubled. "She's been meeting with everyone individually," she said quietly, "asking about current projects, client relationships, team dynamics. She wanted to meet with you next." "Did she say what this was about?" "Getting up to speed on operations. But Amy, the team is getting nervous. Sarah asked me if she should be updating her resume." Sarah Martinez was one of my best consultants, a brilliant strategist who'd been instrumental in landing several major clients. If she was thinking about leaving, it meant the uncertainty was affecting everyone. Tell the team I want to meet with all of them at 4 o'clock, I said. Conference room B, and Jennifer makes sure Lily knows she's welcome to join if she'd like. For the next 2 hours, I worked on client projects while part of my mind processed the morning's conversation with Margaret. The contrast between the two opportunities couldn't have been starker at Alden Ventures. I was being repositioned as a supporting player. At Horizon Tech, I was being recruited as a strategic leader. At 3:30, Arthur appeared in my doorway unannounced. Amy, do you have a few minutes? I wanted to check in and see how the transition is going. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, noting that he looked more tired than usual. The stress of managing family dynamics and business operations was beginning to show. Everything is progressing smoothly, I said diplomatically. Lily is very engaged and asking all the right questions. Arthur settled into his chair with visible relief. I'm glad to hear it. I know this adjustment period can be challenging, but I think you'll find that working with Lily will be refreshing. She brings a different perspective, a different energy. She's certainly enthusiastic, I agreed. Amy, I want to address something directly because I think it's important. Arthur leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. I know you might be feeling disappointed about the promotion. That's natural, and I respect that. But I want you to understand that this decision wasn't about your capabilities or your contributions. It was about what's best for the company moving forward. I nodded, waiting to see where this conversation was headed. The truth is, this business is changing rapidly, and we need leadership that can adapt to those changes. Lily brings connections and perspectives that will serve us well in the years ahead, but that doesn't diminish what you've accomplished here or your value to the organization. I appreciate you saying that. In fact, Arthur continued, I've been thinking about your future here and I want to propose something. How would you feel about taking on a more senior consulting role? You'd have increased autonomy, direct access to our most important clients, and the opportunity to focus on strategic work rather than day-to-day management. It was a generous offer, the kind that would have excited me a week ago. But in the context of this morning's conversation with Margaret, it felt like a consolation prize. What would that look like in practice? I asked. Essentially, you'd be our senior strategist for the West Coast. Lily would handle operations, team management, client relationships, but you'd provide strategic oversight and guidance. Think of it as moving from general manager to strategic advisor. Strategic advisor. It sounded impressive, but I understood what it really meant. I would provide the intellectual capital while Lily received the credit and authority. I would be the ghostwriter of my own success story. It's an interesting proposal, I said carefully. Can I think about it? Of course, but Amy, I hope you'll seriously consider it. You've built something remarkable here, and I'd hate to see that institutional knowledge walk out the door. After Arthur left, I sat in my office thinking about his offer and what it revealed about his understanding of my value to the company. He knew I was essential to their West Coast operations, but he was unwilling to give me the authority that should come with that importance. Instead, he wanted to create a structure where I provided the substance while his family member provided the leadership. It was a perfect metaphor for my entire experience at Alden Ventures: valued, but not empowered, essential but not trusted, family but not really family. At 4 o'clock, I gathered my team in conference room B. All 12 consultants were there along with Jennifer and our 2 project coordinators. Lily arrived a few minutes late, slipping into a chair near the back with an apologetic smile. Thank you all for making time for this, I began. I know there's been a lot of speculation about recent changes, and I wanted to address any concerns directly. Marcus Webb raised his hand immediately. Amy, are you planning to stay with the company? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, I could see the same question reflected in everyone's faces. These people had followed my leadership for 3 years, and they were worried about their futures in a post-Amy world. That's a fair question, and I appreciate you asking it directly, I said. The honest answer is that I'm evaluating my options. Recent organizational changes have created new dynamics that I'm still processing. What does that mean for us? Asked Sarah Martinez. Are we going to be expected to pretend that nepotism is the same thing as merit? I glanced at Lily, who was trying to maintain a professional expression despite the obvious discomfort of hearing her promotion described as nepotism. Sarah, I think it's important that we all approach this transition with open minds and professional attitudes, I said diplomatically. Lily brings valuable experience and fresh perspectives that can benefit our operations. But Sarah wasn't finished. Amy, with all due respect, we didn't build this division to be a training ground for Arthur's relatives. We came here because we believed in your vision, your leadership, your commitment to excellence. If that's changing, then we need to know. The room was completely silent. Lily looked like she wanted to disappear, and I could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me. This was the moment when I needed to choose between diplomacy and honesty, between protecting the company's interests and acknowledging my team's legitimate concerns. What I can tell you, I said finally, is that I will always prioritize what's best for this team and our clients. Your careers, your professional development, your success, those things matter to me more than organizational politics. It wasn't a direct answer, but it was honest. The message was clear: if circumstances changed in ways that threatened their interests, I would act accordingly. Marcus nodded slowly. That's all we needed to hear. After the meeting, Lily approached me with obvious discomfort. Amy, I hope you know that I never intended to create tension within the team. I'm just trying to do the job Arthur asked me to do. I looked at her carefully, trying to assess whether her discomfort was genuine or performative. She was young, possibly naive, but not stupid. She had to understand the dynamics she'd walked into. Lily, this isn't about you personally, I said. It's about a team that's been through a lot together, that's achieved something remarkable, and that's naturally protective of what we've built. I understand that, but I hope you'll give me a chance to prove myself. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to earning everyone's respect. There was something in her tone that made me believe she was sincere. She wasn't just entitled, she was aware of her situation and genuinely wanted to succeed on her own merits. Lily, can I give you some advice? She nodded eagerly. Don't try to be me. Don't try to replicate my leadership style or my relationships with clients. Find your own approach, develop your own strengths, make your own mistakes. The team will respect authenticity more than imitation. Thank you. That's actually really helpful. As she walked away, I found myself feeling something unexpected sympathy. Lily was being set up to fail, thrown into a situation where success would be attributed to family connections and failure would be blamed on inexperience. It wasn't entirely her fault that Arthur had chosen politics over merit, but my sympathy was limited. She had accepted this position knowing it rightfully belonged to someone else, and she would have to live with the consequences of that choice. That evening I called Margaret Chen. Amy, I was hoping to hear from you. Have you had a chance to think about our conversation? I have, and I'm very interested in pursuing this opportunity, but I need to ask you something directly. Of course. Is this offer contingent on me bringing the Alden Ventures relationship with me? Because if it is, I need to know that up front. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Amy, I appreciate you asking that question, and I want to be completely honest with you. Daniel and I have discussed this extensively, and while we value our relationship with Alden Ventures, our primary interest is in your talents and experience. If you joined Horizon Tech, we would obviously need to end our consulting arrangement with Alden Ventures to avoid conflicts of interest. But we're prepared to do that regardless of what other business relationships might be affected. So you're saying this offer stands even if it means losing my current account. That's exactly what I'm saying. Amy, we're not trying to poach a vendor relationship. We're trying to recruit a strategic leader. The fact that you happen to be our current consultant is coincidental to our interest in you as an executive, and the distinction was important both ethically and practically. If Horizon Tech was simply trying to steal their consulting relationship, I would be in an impossible position professionally. But if they were making a genuine job offer based on my qualifications, then I was free to consider it on its merits. In that case, I'd like to move forward with formal discussions. Excellent. How quickly could you be available for interviews with Daniel and our board? I'd need to give Alden Ventures appropriate notice, so probably 2 to 3 weeks minimum. That works perfectly. Can you come in Thursday afternoon to meet with Daniel formally? We'll also want you to meet with our head of operations and a few board members. Thursday sounds perfect. After I hung up, I sat in my home office staring at the resignation letter I'd drafted the night before. What had been a theoretical exercise was rapidly becoming a practical necessity. But before I submitted my resignation, I wanted to have one more conversation. I called Joseph into my office. I need to tell you something, and I want your honest opinion about what I should do. Joseph settled into the chair across from my desk, his expression serious. What's going on? I told him about the Horizon Tech offer, about my conversation with Margaret, about the growing certainty that my future didn't include Alden Ventures. I also told him about Arthur's alternative proposal to become a senior strategist. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Joseph said when I finished. My father wants you to do the work while his niece gets the credit, and Horizon Tech wants to pay you 30% more to do similar work with complete authority and equity participation. That's a fair summary. Joseph laughed, but there was no humor in it. Amy, this isn't a difficult decision. The only question is why you're even considering staying. Because leaving would mean burning bridges with your family, because it would create tension between you and your father, because it feels like I'm giving up instead of fighting for what I deserve. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Amy, my father made his choice when he decided that family politics mattered more than fairness. He created this situation, not you. And as for giving up versus fighting, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from a fight that was rigged from the beginning. What about us? What about your relationship with your father? My relationship with my father will survive this, but my respect for him might not. Amy, he promised you something, you earned it, and he gave it to someone else because of their last name. That's not the kind of man I thought I was raised by, and it's not the kind of behavior I can support, even if he is my father. And that night, I finalized my resignation letter and scheduled the meeting with Daniel Morrison for Thursday. I also made one more phone call to Marcus Webb. Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. I can't go into details yet, but I think you should know that I'll probably be making some career changes in the near future. Are you leaving Alden Ventures? I'm exploring opportunities that would better align with my long-term goals. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Amy, remember what I said about not doing this alone. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, you should know that several of us would be very interested in following your lead. I appreciate that, Marcus, but I'd never ask anyone to make a career decision based on my choices. You're not asking. I'm offering. Sarah and I have already talked about it, and David Chen has been getting calls from headhunters for months. This team exists because of your leadership, not because of Alden Ventures. If you're not going to be here, then some of us might not want to be here either. The implications of Marcus's words were staggering. If I left and took key team members with me, it wouldn't just affect my relationship with Arthur, it would devastate the West Coast operations I'd spent 3 years building. Marcus, I need you to promise me something. Don't make any decisions until I've finalized my own plans. And don't discuss this with the rest of the team yet. I don't want to create unnecessary uncertainty. Understood. But Amy, don't wait too long. Change is coming whether we're prepared for it or not. Thursday afternoon, I walked into Horizon Tech's offices with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. The building was modern and energetic, filled with the kind of collaborative workspace design that encouraged innovation and creativity. It was the opposite of Alden Ventures' traditional corporate environment, and I immediately felt more at home. Daniel Morrison met me in the lobby personally, something that would never happen at Alden Ventures, where executive assistants managed access to senior leadership like bodyguards protecting celebrities. Amy, thank you for making time for this. I know it's a big step to even consider a change, and I want you to know how much we appreciate your willingness to explore this opportunity. The interview process was unlike anything I'd experienced. Instead of formal presentations and scripted questions, it felt like a strategic planning session where we discussed Horizon Tech's challenges, my ideas for addressing them, and how my background could contribute to their continued growth. The thing is, Daniel explained as we sat in his office overlooking the bay, we've reached a point where our success is creating problems we've never had to solve before. We're growing at 30% annually, we're expanding into new markets, and we're trying to maintain our culture while tripling our workforce. The kind of strategic thinking you brought to the Patterson acquisition, we need that kind of insight applied to every aspect of our operations. What's your biggest challenge right now? I asked. Integration. We've made 3 acquisitions in the past 18 months, and while they've all been financially successful, we're struggling to create operational synergies. Each company has its own systems, its own culture, its own way of doing business. We need someone who can see the big picture and help us build a coherent operational strategy. It was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been hoping for, complex, strategic, with significant impact on the company's future. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from organizational design to performance metrics to long-term strategic planning. By the time I left Horizon Tech's offices, I knew I wanted the job. More than that, I knew I needed it. The opportunity to build something significant, to work with people who valued strategic thinking, to have real authority over outcomes. It was everything I'd been missing at Alden Ventures. That evening, I called Margaret Chen to formally accept their offer. Amy, that's wonderful news. Daniel is going to be thrilled. When would you be able to start? I'd need to give Alden Ventures 2 weeks' notice, so the earliest would be 3 weeks from now. Perfect. I'll have our legal team prepare the employment agreement and we can schedule your start date accordingly. Friday morning, I submitted my resignation. I printed the letter I'd written 3 days earlier, signed it carefully, and walked to Arthur's office. His assistant informed me that he was in a meeting, but I asked her to let him know that I needed to speak with him urgently. 20 minutes later, Arthur emerged from his conference room, his expression curious but not concerned. He had no idea what was coming. Amy, Jennifer said you needed to see me urgently. Is everything all right? Could we speak privately? He gestured me into his office, closing the door behind us. I handed him the envelope containing my resignation letter without preamble. Arthur opened it, read the first line, and his face went completely white. Amy, what is this? It's my resignation. I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice. Arthur read the letter again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. This doesn't make sense. We just discussed your future here. I offered you a senior strategic role. I've decided to pursue other opportunities. What other opportunities, Amy? You can't just leave. This is your family's company. The irony of that statement was almost overwhelming. My family's company, where family connections determined advancement more than performance. Arthur, I've made my decision. I'm committed to ensuring a smooth transition, but my last day will be 2 weeks from today. Arthur set the letter down on his desk and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, panic mixed with genuine confusion. Amy, let's talk about this rationally. If this is about the promotion, we can discuss alternatives. If it's about compensation, we can address that. If it's about authority, we can restructure your role, but leaving, that's not a solution, that's a mistake. It's not about any of those things, Arthur. It's about respect. Respect? Of course I respect you. Your contributions here have been invaluable. Then why did you choose someone with 2 months of experience over someone with 3 years of proven results? Arthur was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to find an answer that didn't sound like exactly what it was. Nepotism. Amy, I explained this to you earlier. Lily brings different strengths, different perspectives. Arthur, stop. We both know why you chose Lily, and it had nothing to do with her qualifications. You chose family over merit, politics over performance. That's your right as CEO, but it's also my right to work somewhere that makes different choices. Arthur stood and began pacing behind his desk, a habit I'd noticed whenever he was under stress. Amy, you're being emotional about this. You're making a decision based on disappointment rather than logic. In 5 years, when you've advanced further in this organization, you'll regret this impulsive choice. I'm not being emotional, Arthur. I'm being strategic. And this isn't impulsive, it's inevitable. What does that mean? It means that the moment you decided to give my job to someone else based on their family connection, you made it clear that my future here would always be limited by factors I can't control. I'm 42 years old, Arthur. I don't have time to wait for your family to run out of relatives who need jobs. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes with Arthur alternating between attempts to understand my reasoning and increasingly desperate offers to change my mind. He proposed increased compensation, expanded authority, even a pathway to partnership. But nothing he offered could address the fundamental issue I would never be family in the way that mattered at Alden Ventures. Finally, Arthur sat back in his chair with the defeated expression of a man who'd run out of arguments. Amy, I'm going to ask you one more time to reconsider this decision, not just for the company, but for Joseph, for our family, for everything we've built together. Arthur, everything we built together was built by me. You just took credit for it. It was the most direct thing I'd ever said to him, and the words hung in the air between us like an accusation. That's not fair, he said quietly. Neither was giving my job to your niece. I stood to leave, but Arthur's voice stopped me at the door. Amy, where are you going? What company has convinced you to make this mistake? I turned back to face him, and for the first time in our conversation, I smiled. I'm not making a mistake, Arthur. I'm correcting one. As I walked back to my office, I could hear Arthur on the phone, his voice rising with each call. He was trying to understand what had happened, trying to find a way to fix it, trying to prevent the catastrophe he was just beginning to comprehend, but it was too late for fixes. The moment he'd chosen Lily over me, he'd set these events in motion. Everything that followed was just the inevitable consequence of that single decision. By lunchtime, news of my resignation had spread throughout the office. Jennifer was crying at her desk. Marcus was fielding calls from concerned clients, and Lily was sitting in the conference room, looking like she wanted to disappear. At 2 o'clock, Daniel Morrison called. Amy, I just heard the most interesting rumor. Someone told me you might be leaving Alden Ventures. It's not a rumor, Daniel. I submitted my resignation this morning. I see, and I don't suppose this has anything to do with our conversation about bringing you in-house. It might have something to do with that. Daniel laughed, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Well, I suppose I should mention that Horizon Tech will be terminating our consulting relationship with Alden Ventures effective immediately. Conflicts of interest, you understand. I understand completely. That afternoon, the full scope of my departure began to become clear. Daniel Morrison wasn't the only client who'd called. By close of business, 3 other major clients had requested meetings to discuss the transition, and 2 had already indicated they were considering alternative consulting arrangements. Arthur spent the day in crisis management mode, trying to understand how losing one employee could threaten the entire West Coast operation, but he was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about losing an employee, it was about losing the person who'd built and maintained the relationships that drove 90% of their regional revenue. At 5 o'clock, I gathered my personal belongings and prepared to leave Alden Ventures for the final time. As I packed the last items from my desk, Marcus Webb appeared in my doorway. Amy, I wanted you to know that Sarah and I have decided to submit our resignations on Monday. I looked up, surprised despite our earlier conversation. Marcus, are you sure about this? Completely sure. David Chen is planning to give notice on Tuesday, And Jennifer asked me to tell you that she's already started looking for other opportunities. The domino effect I'd feared was happening even faster than I'd expected. Marcus, Sarah, David, and Jennifer represented four of our most critical team members. Their departure would essentially cripple the West Coast operations. Marcus, I need you to understand something. I never asked anyone to follow me, and I won't take responsibility for other people's career decisions. You don't need to ask Amy, and you don't need to take responsibility. We're all adults and we're all capable of making our own choices. But this team exists because of your leadership, and without that leadership, there's no reason for us to stay. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the 24 hours that had just changed everything. This morning, I'd been a loyal employee of Alden Ventures trying to figure out how to navigate a disappointing but manageable situation. Tonight, I was unemployed, planning to start a new job in 3 weeks and watching the implosion of everything I'd built over the past 3 years. It should have felt devastating. Instead, it felt like freedom. When I arrived home, Joseph was waiting with champagne and the biggest smile I'd seen from him in months. "How did it go?" he asked. "Your father didn't take it well." "I didn't expect him to, but how do you feel?" I thought about the question seriously before answering. Terrified and exhilarated at the same time. That sounds about right for a decision this big. As we sat on our deck overlooking the city, watching the sun set over San Francisco Bay, I realized that this was the first evening in 3 years when I wasn't thinking about tomorrow's client calls, or next week's deadlines, or next quarter's revenue targets. For the first time in 3 years, my time was my own. It felt like the most luxurious gift I'd ever received. The weekend passed in a strange bubble of calm before the storm I knew was coming. Joseph and I spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market, something we hadn't done together in months. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes or thinking about Monday morning meetings. The freedom felt almost surreal. But Sunday evening reality came crashing back when my phone started ringing. The first call was from Jennifer, her voice shaky with anxiety. "Amy, I'm so sorry to bother you at home, but Arthur has been here since 7 this morning. He's been going through your files, your client communications, everything. He looks like he hasn't slept." "What's he looking for?" "I think he's trying to figure out how to keep the Morrison account. He's been asking me about your conversations with Daniel about any commitments or contracts that might transfer the relationship to whoever replaces you." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Arthur was learning what I'd tried to tell him in my resignation meeting, that client relationships in consulting weren't assets you could transfer like office furniture. They were built on trust, personal connection, and proven results. "Jennifer, you don't owe him any information about my private conversations with clients. You work for the company, not for Arthur personally." "I know, but Amy, he's really scared. I've never seen him like this. He keeps talking about containing the damage and protecting the client base. He's called an emergency meeting for first thing Monday morning." After Jennifer hung up, I tried to enjoy what remained of my peaceful Sunday, but the tranquility was broken. Arthur was panicking, which meant Monday was going to be worse than I'd anticipated. Joseph found me sitting on our deck staring out at the bay. "Everything okay?" "Arthur's having what sounds like a complete breakdown. He spent the weekend at the office trying to figure out how to manage the client relationships after I leave." "Is there anything he can do?" I thought about that question seriously. "Technically, no. Clients choose their consultants based on relationship and trust. He can't force them to work with Lily just because she's been given my title, but that doesn't mean he won't try." "What could he try?" "Contractual pressure, legal threats, leveraging other business relationships. Arthur didn't build a successful company by accepting defeat gracefully." Monday morning arrived with an urgency that felt electric. I arrived at the office to find Arthur's car already in the parking lot, along with several others I didn't recognize. Through the lobby windows, I could see people in suits moving around the conference room with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested crisis management. Jennifer met me at the elevator, her expression grim. Amy, thank God you're here. Arthur wants to see you immediately. He's brought in lawyers from New York. Lawyers. That escalated things significantly. What kind of lawyers? Corporate counsel, I think. They've been asking about non-compete clauses, client confidentiality agreements, anything that might restrict your ability to work elsewhere. I felt my pulse quicken. My employment contract with Alden Ventures did include a non-compete clause, but it was standard boilerplate language that restricted me from working for direct competitors within 6 months of leaving. Horizon Tech wasn't a competitor, they were a client, but lawyers could be creative with interpretations when enough money was at stake. Where is everyone else? Marcus and Sarah are in the break room. They look like they're preparing for war. David Chen called in sick, but I think he's probably interviewing somewhere. And Lily, Jennifer paused, looking uncomfortable. Lily's been crying in her office since she got here. The image of Lily crying struck me unexpectedly. Whatever her faults, she was being thrown into an impossible situation through no fault of her own. Amy Carter, Arthur's voice boomed across the lobby. He was standing in the doorway of the conference room, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. We need to talk. I followed them into the conference room, noting that the atmosphere felt more like a deposition than a business meeting. Arthur sat at the head of the table with his lawyers on either side, while I was directed to a single chair facing them across the polished wood surface. Amy, these are our corporate attorneys, Robert Steinberg and Michael Chen. They flew in from New York this morning to help us understand the legal implications of your departure. Robert Steinberg, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes, opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. Ms. Carter, we've reviewed your employment agreement with Alden Ventures, and we have some concerns about your sudden resignation and its potential impact on our client relationships. What concerns specifically, your contract includes non-disclosure and non-compete provisions that may be relevant to your future employment plans. We understand you've already accepted a position with Horizon Tech, one of our largest clients. The room went completely silent. I hadn't told anyone except Joseph about the Horizon Tech offer, which meant they'd either made educated guesses or conducted some kind of investigation. My employment plans are my own business, I said carefully. Michael Chen, younger and more aggressive than his partner, leaned forward. Actually, Ms. Carter, when those plans involve our clients and potentially confidential information, they become our business as well. Arthur was watching this exchange with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of desperation and determination that made him look like a stranger. Amy, he said, his voice unnaturally calm, we're not trying to be difficult here. We're simply trying to protect the company's interests. If you're planning to work for Horizon Tech, we need to understand how that might affect the consulting relationship we've built with them. Arthur, you know exactly how it will affect that relationship. Daniel Morrison has already terminated the consulting contract. The lawyers exchanged glances, and I realized I'd just confirmed something they'd suspected but couldn't prove. Ms. Carter, Robert Steinberg said, did you encourage Mr. Morrison to terminate that relationship? I did not. Daniel Morrison is a sophisticated business executive who's perfectly capable of making his own decisions about consulting relationships. But you did discuss your employment plans with him before submitting your resignation here. I could see where this was headed, and I didn't like it. My conversations with clients were professional and appropriate. We'll be the judge of that, Michael Chen said. Ms. Carter, we're prepared to seek an injunction preventing you from working for Horizon Tech if we determine that your departure constitutes unfair competition or violation of your contractual obligations. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Arthur was playing hardball, using legal intimidation to try to prevent me from taking the job I'd already accepted. On what grounds? I asked. Breach of fiduciary duty, violation of non-disclosure agreements, tortious interference with business relationships. We have several options, Steinberg replied smoothly. I looked at Arthur, trying to understand how we'd reached this point. 3 days ago, he'd been offering me promotions and increased compensation. Now he was threatening to sue me to prevent me from leaving. Arthur, is this really the route you want to take, legal threats against family? His expression hardened. Amy, you made this adversarial when you decided to steal our biggest client on your way out the door. I didn't steal anything. I resigned from a job where I was treated unfairly, and I accepted an offer from a company that values my contributions. The fact that your client chose to end their relationship with you is a consequence of your decisions, not mine. That's where you're wrong, Michael Chen interjected. Corporate executives have fiduciary duties to their employers that extend beyond their termination date. If we can demonstrate that you used confidential information or client relationships developed during your employment here to benefit a competitor, we have grounds for significant legal action. The word competitor was key. Horizon Tech wasn't a consulting company, but they were terminating their consulting relationship with Alden Ventures to bring that function in-house. A creative lawyer might argue that made them a competitor. Gentlemen, I think we should all take a step back here, I said. This conversation feels more like an interrogation than a professional discussion. If you have specific allegations about my conduct, I suggest you make them clearly. Otherwise, I have work to finish during my notice period. Arthur stood abruptly, his composure finally cracking. Amy, this is insane. You're destroying everything we built together over a promotion that you'll probably get anyway in a year or two. You're being emotional and impulsive, and you're making decisions that will hurt everyone. Arthur, I'm not being emotional. I'm being logical. And I'm not destroying anything. I'm removing myself from a situation where my contributions aren't valued appropriately. Not valued? Arthur's voice rose. Amy, I offered you a senior strategic position with complete autonomy and direct client access. How is that not valuing your contributions? Because it was a consolation prize designed to make me feel better about being passed over for the job I earned. You wanted me to do the work while Lily got the credit and authority. That's not, Arthur started, then stopped himself, apparently realizing that his denial wouldn't sound convincing. The lawyers were taking notes throughout this exchange, probably building whatever case they thought they might have against me. But their presence was having an unexpected effect. It was clarifying the stakes and hardening my resolve. Arthur, let me ask you something directly, I said. If I agreed to stay, would you reverse Lily's promotion and give me the regional director position? Arthur was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn between his desire to keep me and his unwillingness to admit he'd made a mistake. Amy, I can't just... The decision has been made, announced. Reversing it now would be admitting that you chose wrong. It would be disruptive to the organization. I nodded, finally understanding the complete futility of this conversation. Arthur would rather lose his best performer than admit he'd made a poor decision based on family politics. Then we don't have anything else to discuss, I said, standing to leave. Ms. Carter, Robert Steinberg's voice stopped me at the door. We strongly advise you to reconsider your employment plans. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming, and it could significantly damage your professional reputation. I turned back to face him, feeling a cold anger building in my chest. Mr. Steinberg, I've spent 3 years building my professional reputation through excellent work and ethical behavior. If Alden Ventures wants to damage that reputation through frivolous litigation, you're welcome to try. But you should know that I've documented every aspect of my employment here, including promises that were made and subsequently broken. The threat was implicit but clear. If they wanted to play legal hardball, I had ammunition of my own. Arthur's face went white. Amy, what does that mean? It means that if you force me to defend myself legally, I'll be very thorough in explaining to a judge exactly why I chose to leave Alden Ventures, including conversations where you explicitly promised me the regional director position. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of my statement. A wrongful termination or discrimination lawsuit would be far more damaging to Alden Ventures than losing a single client relationship. This meeting is over. Over, I said, walking toward the door. I'll be in my office finishing my transition work. If you want to continue this conversation through lawyers, that's your choice. As I left the conference room, I could hear urgent whispered conversations behind me. The lawyers were probably explaining to Arthur why pursuing litigation might not be the best strategy. I found Marcus and Sarah in the break room, both looking tense and worried. Amy, thank God, Sarah said immediately. We heard Arthur brought in lawyers. Are they trying to prevent you from leaving? They're trying to intimidate me into staying, but it's not going to work. Marcus stood up, his expression grim. Amy, Sarah, and I have been talking, and we want you to know that whatever happens, we're with you. If they try to make this ugly, you won't be facing it alone. The loyalty was touching, but I was worried about the consequences for them. Marcus, I appreciate that, but you need to be careful. Don't put your own careers at risk because of my situation. Amy, our careers here are already at risk, Sarah replied. Do you really think Arthur is going to trust us after this? We're seen as your people, and that makes us liabilities in his eyes. She was probably right. In the corporate world, loyalty to a departed executive often translated to disloyalty to current management. My team members would be viewed with suspicion, regardless of how professionally they handled the transition. Have you made decisions about your own futures? I asked. We're submitting our resignations today, Marcus said. We've already discussed it extensively, and we're both ready to move on. Where will you go? Sarah smiled for the first time all morning. Actually, we were hoping you might have some suggestions. We know you can't offer us positions at Horizon Tech directly, but we thought you might know of other opportunities. The request was perfectly reasonable and entirely legal, but it illustrated exactly what Arthur was afraid of. When valued employees leave a company, they often take institutional knowledge, client relationships, and team members with them. The exodus wasn't vindictive. It was a natural consequence of poor management decisions. I'll make some calls, I promised. There are several firms in the area that would be lucky to have either of you. At 11 o'clock, Lily appeared in my office doorway looking like she hadn't slept. Her usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by red eyes and wrinkled clothes that suggested she'd been stress eating and crying since Friday. Amy, could I talk to you for a few minutes? I gestured to the chair across from my desk, curious about what she wanted to discuss. Amy, I want you to know that I never wanted this to happen. When Arthur offered me the promotion, I had no idea that you'd been promised the position. I thought it was a normal succession planning decision. I studied her face, trying to assess her sincerity. Lily, what did Arthur tell you about my role here when he offered you the job? He said that you were a valued consultant who'd done excellent work building the West Coast operations, but that the company needed fresh leadership to take things to the next level. He made it sound like you were ready to transition to a more strategic role anyway. It was a masterful reframing of the situation, painting my displacement as a natural evolution rather than a betrayal. Arthur had managed to recruit Lily without making her feel like she was stealing someone else's job. Did he mention that he'd explicitly promised me the regional director position when Harrison retired? Lily's face crumpled. No, he never said anything about promises. Amy, if I'd known, I never would have accepted the promotion. I believed her. Lily was young and naive, but she wasn't malicious. She'd been manipulated as much as I had, just in a different way. Lily, this situation isn't your fault. Arthur created it by making commitments he didn't intend to keep. But what do I do now? Everyone here knows I don't deserve this job. Half the team is quitting because of me. The clients are asking for you specifically. I feel like I'm set up to fail. It was an accurate assessment. Lily was indeed set up to fail, thrown into a role she wasn't qualified for, and expected to manage a crisis she hadn't created. Can I give you some advice? She nodded eagerly. Talk to Arthur about restructuring your role. Maybe there's a way to position you as Deputy Regional Director or Operations Manager, something that acknowledges your experience level while giving you room to grow into greater responsibility. Do you think he'd consider that? Honestly, I don't know. Arthur doesn't like admitting mistakes and repositioning. You would essentially be acknowledging that promoting you was premature. Lily was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the political complexities of her situation. Amy, is there any chance you'd consider staying if Arthur restructured things differently? I'd been expecting this question, and I'd already decided on my answer. No, Lily. Too much has been said and done. Even if Arthur offered me the regional director position today, I couldn't trust that the next family member wouldn't bump me out of that role as well. I understand. And Amy, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserved better than this. After Lily left, I spent the afternoon making transition calls to clients, explaining my departure, and introducing them to other team members who could handle their ongoing needs. The conversations were uniformly uncomfortable with most clients, expressing surprise and concern about the change. The most difficult call was to Daniel Morrison, even though he already knew about my resignation. Amy, I wanted to check in and see how the transition is going on your end. It's been eventful. Arthur brought in lawyers this morning to discuss my departure. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What kind of legal discussion? They're concerned about the Horizon Tech opportunity and its impact on the consulting relationship. There were some vague threats about non-compete violations and unfair competition. Amy, I hope you know that Horizon Tech will support you completely if Alden Ventures tries to pursue any legal action. We have excellent counsel and we're not intimidated by corporate bullying tactics. The support was reassuring, but I was hoping it wouldn't come to that. I think Arthur's just panicking. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail. Maybe. But Amy, you should know that this morning I received a call from Arthur personally. He wanted to discuss maintaining the consulting relationship despite your departure. What did you tell him? I told him that our relationship was with you, not with Alden Ventures as an institution. I also mentioned that Horizon Tech's legal team would be reviewing all existing contracts to ensure they align with our current business needs. It was a polite way of saying that Arthur's legal threats could work both ways. If Alden Ventures wanted to play hardball, Horizon Tech had resources to respond in kind. Daniel, I hope this doesn't create complications for you. Amy, the only complication would be if we lost the opportunity to work with you directly. Everything else is just business. At 4:00, Arthur appeared in my office without warning, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. His lawyers were nowhere to be seen, and his demeanor was completely different from this morning's confrontational approach. Amy, I think we need to have an honest conversation, just the two of us. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, curious about this change in tone. Arthur sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. Amy, I owe you an apology. This morning's meeting was a mistake. I was panicking and I let the lawyers convince me that legal pressure was the answer. What changed your mind? Joseph called me an hour ago. He told me exactly what he thought of my behavior using language I haven't heard from him since he was a teenager. Arthur managed a weak smile. He also made it clear that if I pursue any legal action against you, he'll consider it a personal attack on his wife and act accordingly. The image of mild-mannered Joseph threatening his father was both surprising and touching. Arthur, I never asked Joseph to. I know you didn't. But Amy, that conversation made me realize how badly I've handled this entire situation. I've damaged my relationship with my son. I'm losing my best regional performer, and I've created a crisis that could have been avoided entirely. How could it have been avoided? Arthur was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the bay. By keeping my promise to you, by promoting the person who earned it instead of the person who shared my DNA. It was the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I was likely to get from Arthur. Why didn't you? I asked. Why did you choose Lily over me? Arthur sighed deeply. Honestly, because Marcus pressured me. My brother has been pushing for Lily to have a significant role in the company ever since she graduated from college. He made it clear that the family's continued investment in Alden Ventures was contingent on opportunities for the next generation. So it came down to money and family politics, just as I'd suspected. Marcus Carter controlled a significant portion of Alden Ventures' capital, and he'd used that leverage to secure his daughter's promotion. Arthur, I wish you'd been honest with me about that pressure. I should have been. But Amy, I was hoping I could find a way to make everyone happy, give Lily a leadership role while still recognizing your contributions. Instead, you made everyone unhappy. Yes, I did. Arthur looked directly at me for the first time in our conversation. Amy, I know it's too late to fix this, but I want you to know that I understand what I'm losing. You're not just a good employee, you're the best strategic mind I've ever worked with. Losing you is going to set this company back years. Then why not fight for me instead of fighting against me? Because I'm a coward, Arthur said simply. I was afraid of the family conflict, afraid of the financial consequences, afraid of admitting I'd made a mistake. So I chose the path of least resistance, and it turned out to be the path of maximum damage. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 3 years of working relationship settling between us. Arthur, what happens now? Now I try to salvage what I can from this disaster. The lawyers are gone. I sent them back to New York this afternoon. There will be no legal action, no threats, no attempts to prevent you from working wherever you choose. And Lily? I don't know yet. She's not ready for the regional director role, and everyone knows it. I may need to bring in an interim manager while she develops her skills. What about the clients? Arthur's expression darkened. We've lost Morrison, obviously. Patterson Industries called this morning asking to discuss their account management. Redwood Ventures wants a meeting next week to review our strategic relationship. Amy, we may lose 50% of our West Coast revenue within the next month. The numbers were staggering but not surprising. Client relationships in consulting were personal, built on trust and proven results. When the trusted advisor left, clients naturally questioned whether they wanted to continue the relationship. Arthur, there might be a way to minimize the damage. He looked up hopefully. What do you mean? If you handled the transition professionally, acknowledged my contributions, publicly wished me well in my new role, made it clear that my departure was amicable, it might help preserve some client relationships. You'd be willing to help with that. I'd be willing to make some calls, explain that this was a positive career move rather than a conflict with Alden Ventures. It wouldn't save all the accounts, but it might save some. Arthur stared at me as if I'd just offered him a life preserver while he was drowning. Amy, why would you do that after everything that's happened? Because despite our disagreements, I respect what you've built here, and because I don't want to see good people lose their jobs because of leadership failures. And it was an olive branch, an offer to end our relationship professionally rather than destructively. Arthur had the choice to accept gracefully or continue fighting a battle he couldn't win. Amy, I accept your offer and I'm grateful for it. More grateful than you'll ever know. We spent the next hour crafting a transition strategy that would minimize damage to both sides. Arthur would send a company-wide email acknowledging my contributions and announcing my new role at Horizon Tech in positive terms. I would make calls to key clients, explaining my departure and recommending continued partnership with Alden Ventures where appropriate. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a mature one, the kind of professional resolution that should have been possible from the beginning if ego and family politics hadn't interfered. As our conversation was ending, Arthur asked one final question. Amy, in 5 years, when you're successful at Horizon Tech and this whole mess is behind us, do you think you'll be able to forgive me? I considered the question carefully. Arthur, I'll always regret how this ended, but forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning from it and moving forward. Yes, I think I'll be able to forgive you. The question is whether you'll be able to forgive yourself. That evening I went home and told Joseph about my final conversation with his father. We sat on our deck again, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness fell over San Francisco. "How do you feel about his apology?" Joseph asked. "Relieved mostly. It would have been awful to end 3 years of working relationship with lawyers and threats. But, but also sad. This whole situation could have been handled so differently if Arthur had just been honest about the family pressures he was facing." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "My father has always struggled with difficult conversations. He'd rather make unilateral decisions than deal with conflict. Well, this time his conflict avoidance created much bigger problems than honesty would have." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the end of an era. Tomorrow would be my last week at Alden Ventures, the end of a chapter that had defined my professional life for 3 years. "Joseph, are you okay with how this turned out? I know it's created tension with your family." "Amy, I'm proud of how you handled this. You stood up for yourself without being vindictive. You negotiated a professional exit despite personal disappointment, and you showed more grace than my father deserved." "It doesn't feel graceful. It feels like I'm running away from a fight." "No," Joseph said firmly. "Running away would have been accepting Arthur's consolation prize and staying quiet about the injustice. What you did was refuse to accept treatment that was beneath your worth. That's not running away, that's moving towards something better." As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the conversation with Arthur and what it revealed about leadership, family, and the complex dynamics that drive corporate decisions. Arthur wasn't a bad man, but he was a weak leader when family pressure conflicted with business judgment. His apology had provided closure, but it couldn't undo the fundamental lesson of the past week. My professional future couldn't depend on other people's choices about my worth. From now on, I would work only for organizations and leaders who valued my contributions enough to back them up with meaningful opportunities. Tomorrow would begin my final week at Alden Ventures, but it would also mark the beginning of something new, a future where my success would be determined by my own choices rather than family politics and corporate favoritism. For the first time since this entire crisis began, I felt genuinely excited about what came next. My final week at Alden Ventures unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of professional courtesy, masking deeper currents of change. Arthur kept his word about the graceful transition, sending a company-wide email Tuesday morning that painted my departure in the most positive possible terms. It is with mixed emotions that I announce Amy Carter's departure from Alden Ventures to pursue an exciting opportunity as Director of Strategic Operations at Horizon Tech. The email read, "Amy has been instrumental in building our West Coast division into the success it is today, and while we will miss her tremendous contributions, we celebrate this well-deserved advancement in her career." The email was everything we'd agreed upon, professional, positive, and completely devoid of any hint of the real drama that had preceded my resignation. But the responses it generated told a different story. Within an hour, my inbox was flooded with messages from colleagues, clients, and industry contacts. Some were congratulatory, others were shocked, and a few were barely concealed expressions of concern about Alden Ventures' future. The message that struck me most came from Harrison Mitchell, the former regional director whose retirement had triggered this entire crisis. "Amy," he wrote, "I heard the news and wanted to reach out personally. In my 15 years in this role, I never built anything close to what you accomplished in 3. I'm sorry the succession didn't work out as it should have, but I'm excited to see what you'll build next. Arthur's loss is truly Horizon Tech's gain." The acknowledgement from Harrison meant more to me than he could know. It validated that my disappointment wasn't just wounded pride, it was a legitimate response to a legitimate injustice. Tuesday afternoon brought my first official meeting as Horizon Tech's Director of Strategic Operations. Daniel Morrison had arranged for me to spend the day with Margaret Chen and their operations team getting oriented to the internal dynamics before my official start date. Walking into Horizon Tech's offices felt like stepping into a different world. where Alden Ventures favored dark wood and formal corporate aesthetics, Horizon Tech was all glass, steel, and collaborative spaces designed to encourage innovation. The energy was palpable, people moved with purpose. Conversations buzzed with excitement about projects and possibilities, and there was an underlying sense that everyone was building something significant together. Amy, welcome to the team, Margaret said, greeting me in the lobby. I know you're technically still employed elsewhere for a few more days, but we wanted you to meet everyone and start understanding our operational challenges. The next 6 hours were a revelation. Instead of the hierarchical information hoarding I'd grown accustomed to at Alden Ventures, Horizon Tech operated with radical transparency, financial data, strategic plans, competitive analysis. Everything was shared openly, with senior staff creating an environment where decisions could be made quickly and collaboratively. Our biggest challenge right now, explained Tom Rodriguez, the head of operations, is scaling our processes without losing the agility that made us successful. We've grown from 50 employees to over 200 in 18 months, and our systems are struggling to keep up. It was exactly the kind of complex strategic challenge I'd been hoping for, important enough to matter, complicated enough to be interesting, and undefined enough to require creative thinking rather than template solutions. What metrics are you using to measure operational efficiency? I asked. That's part of the problem, Margaret replied. We're tracking traditional metrics like revenue per employee and customer satisfaction scores, but we suspect we're missing some key indicators that would help us identify bottlenecks before they become crises. I spent the rest of the afternoon diving into their data, asking questions, and beginning to form hypotheses about where improvements might be possible. By the time I left their offices, I was more energized about work than I'd felt in months. The contrast with my remaining days at Alden Ventures couldn't have been starker. While I was getting excited about solving new problems at Horizon Tech, the situation at my soon-to-be former employer was deteriorating rapidly. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office to find Lily in tears again, this time sitting in Arthur's office while he paced behind his desk with his phone pressed to his ear. Through the glass walls, I could see him gesticulating frantically, clearly in damage control mode. Jennifer appeared at my elbow with the morning's crisis update. Patterson Industries called at 7 a.m. to terminate their contract. They're moving their consulting business to McKenna Strategic. That's $12 million in annual revenue gone. $12 million. Combined with the Morrison account, Arthur had lost nearly 40% of the West Coast Division's revenue in less than a week. How's Arthur handling it? About as well as you'd expect. He's been on the phone with New York all morning trying to explain to the board how we went from a success story to a disaster in 5 days. The irony wasn't lost on me. Arthur had chosen family politics over business judgment, and now he was facing the business consequences of that choice. The board in New York had trusted him to manage West Coast operations effectively, and his decision to prioritize Lily's career advancement over operational stability was looking catastrophically short-sighted. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus Webb appeared in my office doorway carrying a box of his personal belongings. Well, that's it, he said, setting the box down on my desk. I just submitted my resignation, effective immediately. What changed? I thought you were staying through Friday. Marcus's expression was grim. I had a meeting with Lily this morning where she tried to assign me to shadow a junior consultant on the Patterson transition. Apparently, Arthur told her that the senior team needed to prove our loyalty by accepting reduced responsibilities. Reduced responsibilities. Yeah, David Chen got assigned to data entry tasks. Sarah Martinez is being asked to conduct research on industry best practices, basically busy work designed to keep us occupied while they figure out what to do with us. I felt a surge of anger on behalf of my former team. These were brilliant, accomplished professionals being treated like insubordinate children because of their association with me. Marcus, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Amy, don't apologize. You didn't create this situation, Arthur did, And honestly, his reaction to our resignations is just confirming that we're making the right choice. Have you lined up something else? Marcus smiled for the first time all week. Actually, yes. Remember that call you said you'd make? Well, McKenna Strategic called me yesterday afternoon. Apparently, they're expanding their West Coast operations and looking for senior consultants with client development experience. McKenna Strategic, the same firm that had just landed the Patterson Industries account. The implications were obvious. They weren't just hiring talented consultants, they were positioning themselves to capture more of Alden Ventures' former clients by recruiting the people who'd managed those relationships. That's wonderful news, Marcus. They're lucky to get you. Thanks. And Amy, they asked about Sarah and David too. I get the impression they're planning a pretty significant expansion. By Thursday afternoon, the exodus from Alden Ventures was complete. Marcus, Sarah, David Chen, and two junior consultants had all submitted resignations. Jennifer had accepted a position with a startup downtown. Even the office cleaning company had given notice after Arthur questioned their billing practices in what they apparently considered an unnecessarily aggressive manner. The West Coast division that I'd spent 3 years building was essentially gone dissolved in less than a week by the aftershocks of Arthur's poor decision-making. Thursday evening, I had dinner with Daniel Morrison and Margaret Chen to finalize details for my transition to Horizon Tech. We met at a quiet restaurant in Palo Alto, away from the San Francisco business district, where industry gossip traveled faster than actual news. Amy, I have to ask, Daniel said once we'd ordered wine and settled into our conversation. Do you feel any regret about how things ended at Alden Ventures? It was a question I'd been asking myself all week. Honestly, I regret that it had to end so destructively. I would have preferred a situation where everyone could move forward professionally without burning bridges or creating crises. But do you regret leaving? Not for a second. Daniel this week has reminded me why I fell in love with strategic consulting in the first place. The work you're asking me to do at Horizon Tech is exactly what I've been hoping for: complex, meaningful, with real impact on the organization's future. Margaret leaned forward, her expression curious. Amy, what would you have done differently if you were in Arthur's position? I thought about that question carefully. I would have been honest about the family pressures I was facing. I would have explained to Lily that she needed more experience before taking on a leadership role, and I would have honored the commitments I'd made to the people who'd earned advancement through their performance, even if it meant conflict with family members, especially if it meant conflict with family members. Leadership requires making difficult decisions based on what's best for the organization, not what's most comfortable for the leader. Daniel nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need at Horizon Tech. Amy, we're not just hiring you to manage operations. We're hiring you to help us think strategically about growth, about culture, about the kind of company we want to become. The conversation continued for 2 hours, ranging from immediate operational challenges to long-term strategic vision. By the time we parted ways, I felt like I understood not just my job responsibilities, but my role in helping shape Horizon Tech's future. Friday morning arrived with the strange mixture of closure and anticipation that marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. My office was already packed, 3 years of work reduced to 2 boxes of personal items and a laptop bag full of transition documents. At 10 o'clock, Arthur knocked on my doorframe. Amy, do you have a few minutes for a final conversation? I gestured to the empty chair across from my desk, noting that he looked exhausted. The stress of the past week had aged him visibly, adding lines around his eyes and a slump to his shoulders that spoke of defeat. I wanted to thank you again for handling this transition so professionally, he began. Your client calls this week probably saved us from losing even more accounts. I'm glad I could help minimize the damage. Arthur was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the bay. Amy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. If I had offered you the regional director position on Monday before any of this escalated, would you have stayed? I'd been expecting this question all week, and I'd thought carefully about my answer. Arthur, if you had offered me the promotion I'd earned along with a genuine acknowledgement that the original decision was a mistake, I probably would have stayed. But it would have required more than just a title change. It would have required rebuilding trust that had been fundamentally damaged. What would rebuilding that trust have looked like? Complete autonomy over West Coast operations, direct reporting to the board on regional performance, and a clear succession plan that wasn't subject to family politics. Arthur nodded slowly. In other words, you would have needed guarantees that this situation couldn't happen again. Exactly. Amy, I don't think I could have provided those guarantees. The family dynamics that created this problem aren't going away, and I suspect this won't be the last time I'm pressured to prioritize family interests over business judgment. It was a remarkably honest admission, and it confirmed what I'd already suspected, that leaving was the right choice even beyond the immediate circumstances. Arthur, can I ask you something now? Of course. What are you going to do about Lily? She's clearly not ready for the regional director role, and the team dynamics are completely dysfunctional. Arthur sighed deeply. I'm bringing in an interim manager from our Chicago office while I figure out a longer-term solution. Lily will transition to a business development role where she can learn the industry without being responsible for operations. That sounds like a reasonable approach. Amy, I want you to know that I've learned something important from this experience. Family businesses require extra vigilance about separating personal relationships from professional decisions. I failed at that vigilance, and it cost the company far more than I could have imagined. What will you do differently going forward? I'm implementing a formal succession planning process with external oversight. No more unilateral decisions about promotions, especially when family members are involved. The board will have input on all senior appointments. It was exactly the kind of structural change that might have prevented this crisis implemented too late to help me, but potentially valuable for future employees. Arthur, I think that's a smart approach, and I hope it helps you avoid situations like this in the future. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the weight of 3 years of working relationship settling between us one final time. Amy, I know this sounds hollow after everything that's happened, but I want you to know that I consider you one of the most talented executives I've ever worked with. Losing you is the biggest professional mistake I've ever made. I appreciate you saying that. And I want you to know that if you ever decide to start your own consulting firm, Alden Ventures would be very interested in contracting your services. I smiled at the irony. Arthur, given what's happened this week, I think my consulting services might be a little expensive for your budget. He laughed, the first genuine laughter I'd heard from him all week. Fair enough, but the offer stands. At noon, the entire remaining staff gathered in the main conference room for my farewell reception. It was a small group: Arthur, Lily, 3 junior consultants who decided to stay, and a handful of administrative staff. The contrast with the vibrant team I'd led just a week earlier was stark and depressing. Lily approached me during the reception looking more composed than she had all week. Amy, I wanted to thank you for your advice about talking to Arthur. We had a good conversation yesterday about restructuring my role. I'm glad that worked out. How are you feeling about the business development position? Honestly relieved. I knew I wasn't ready for the regional director job, but I didn't know how to say that without disappointing Arthur and my father. Lily, can I give you one more piece of advice? She nodded. Don't let family expectations dictate your career timeline. Build your skills, earn your promotions, and advance when you're ready, rather than when it's convenient for family politics. That's exactly what I intend to do. And Amy, I hope someday I can earn advancement the way you did, through performance rather than connections. As I left Alden Ventures for the final time, carrying my boxes to the parking lot, I reflected on the strange mix of emotions I was feeling: sadness for the relationships that had been damaged, anger about the injustice that had triggered this crisis, relief about escaping a dysfunctional situation, and excitement about the opportunities ahead. But more than anything, I felt proud. I'd handled an impossible situation with dignity, negotiated a professional exit despite personal disappointment, and secured an opportunity that was better than anything I'd been working toward at Alden Ventures. The drive home gave me time to process the end of this chapter and prepare mentally for what came next. Monday morning, I would walk into Horizon Tech as Director of Strategic Operations with complete authority over my area of responsibility and the supportive leadership that had recruited me specifically for my talents and experience. That evening, Joseph and I celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant, the same place where we'd had our first date 7 years earlier. It felt appropriate to mark this transition at a place that represented new beginnings. "How do you feel?" Joseph asked as we settled into our booth. "Free," I said immediately. "For 3 years, I've been trying to prove myself worthy of opportunities that other people controlled. Now I'm in a position where my success depends on my own performance rather than family politics or corporate favoritism. Are you nervous about the new job? Absolutely. But it's the good kind of nervous, the kind that comes with exciting challenges rather than impossible situations." Joseph raised his wine glass. "To new beginnings and better decisions. To knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less." As we clinked glasses, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a loyal employee hoping for recognition from a company that ultimately valued family connections over merit. Tonight, I was a senior executive preparing to lead strategic operations for a company that had recruited me specifically because of my proven abilities. The transformation hadn't been easy or comfortable, but it had been necessary. Sometimes the most important career decisions aren't about pursuing opportunities, they're about walking away from situations that don't serve your interests or align with your values. Over the weekend, I received a steady stream of congratulatory messages from former colleagues, industry contacts, and clients who'd heard about my move to Horizon Tech. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source, Harrison Mitchell, the former regional director whose retirement had started this entire chain of events. "Amy," he wrote, "I've been thinking about our conversation last year when I announced my retirement plans. You asked me what advice I'd give to someone taking over regional leadership, and I told you that the most important thing was to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect. You did exactly that, and the results speak for themselves. Arthur made a mistake in not recognizing that, but his mistake created an opportunity for you to find a situation where your talents will be properly valued. I couldn't be happier about your success." Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of October in San Francisco, the kind of weather that makes you feel like anything is possible. I drove to Horizon Tech's offices with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy, ready to begin the next phase of my career. Margaret Chen met me in the lobby at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying coffee and wearing the kind of welcoming smile that immediately put me at ease. "Amy, welcome to your first official day. Are you ready to dive in? More than ready." The day began with a team meeting where Margaret introduced me formally to the operations staff, 12 brilliant, motivated professionals who would be working with me to solve Horizon Tech's scaling challenges. Unlike my final team meeting at Alden Ventures, where tension and uncertainty had dominated the conversation, this meeting buzzed with energy and optimism. "Amy brings exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need to navigate our growth challenges," Margaret explained to the group. Her experience building operations from the ground up, combined with her track record of managing client relationships and team development, makes her perfectly suited to help us scale effectively. After the meeting, I spent the morning in one-on-one conversations with each team member, learning about their roles, their challenges, and their ideas for improving operations. The contrast with my final week at Alden Ventures couldn't have been starker. Instead of managing a demoralized team, dealing with the aftermath of leadership failures. I was working with energized professionals, eager to tackle meaningful problems. At lunch, Daniel Morrison stopped by my office to check on my first day. "How's it going so far?" "Better than I could have hoped." "Daniel, you've built something really special here, the team dynamics, the culture, the shared sense of purpose. It's exactly the kind of environment where good people can do their best work." Daniel smiled, clearly pleased with my assessment. "Amy, that culture is something we're very protective of, especially as we grow. One of the things we're hoping you can help us with is maintaining that collaborative, innovative spirit while implementing the systems and processes we need to operate at scale." "That's exactly the kind of challenge I was hoping for." "Good, because we have big plans for the next 2 years, and we're going to need strategic thinking to execute them successfully." The afternoon flew by as I dove into operational data, financial projections, and strategic planning documents. Every hour revealed new layers of complexity and opportunity, the kind of multifaceted challenges that made consulting work intellectually rewarding. At 5 o'clock, as I was preparing to leave for the day, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Amy, this is Sarah Martinez. I wanted you to know that Marcus David and I all started at McKenna Strategic today. Our first assignment is helping them expand their West Coast operations. Thought you'd appreciate the irony." I smiled at the message, remembering my conversation with Marcus about McKenna Strategic's interest in former Alden Ventures consultants. The business world was small, and talented people found their way to organizations that valued their contributions. I texted back, "Congratulations. I'm so happy you found a situation where your talents will be appreciated." Her response came immediately. "Thanks to your example, you showed us that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away from a situation that doesn't serve your interests." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange symmetry of the day. While I was beginning an exciting new chapter at Horizon Tech, my former colleagues were starting their own new chapters at McKenna Strategic. Arthur's decision to promote Lily over me had triggered a chain of events that scattered talent across the industry, ultimately strengthening our competitors while weakening Alden Ventures. But perhaps most importantly, it had forced all of us to confront fundamental questions about our careers, our values, and our willingness to accept treatment that fell short of what we deserved. That night, as Joseph and I sat on our deck watching the sun set over San Francisco Bay, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing for weeks. The crisis that had begun with Arthur's announcement was finally resolved not through confrontation or compromise, but through the simple act of choosing to pursue opportunities that aligned with my values and recognized my worth. "Any regrets?" Joseph asked. "None," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I meant it completely. 6 months later, I was standing in the conference room at Horizon Tech, presenting quarterly results to the board of directors when I realized how completely my life had transformed. The numbers on the screen told a story of remarkable success: operational efficiency up 37%, customer satisfaction scores at all-time highs, and cost savings that had exceeded our most optimistic projections by nearly 40%. "Amy, these results are extraordinary," said Rebecca Patterson, the board chair and a legendary figure in Silicon Valley venture capital. "Can you walk us through the strategic thinking that drove these improvements?" I clicked to the next slide, feeling the confidence that comes from presenting work you're genuinely proud of. The key was recognizing that our rapid growth had created silos between departments that were duplicating efforts and slowing decision-making. By implementing cross-functional teams and streamlining our approval processes, we've been able to maintain our innovative culture while dramatically improving our operational effectiveness. Daniel Morrison, sitting at the head of the table, was practically glowing with satisfaction. In the 6 months since I joined Horizon Tech, our collaboration had evolved into exactly the kind of strategic partnership I'd always hoped for, challenging, respectful, and focused on building something meaningful together. Amy, what's your assessment of our readiness for the European expansion? Asked another board member. We're ahead of schedule. The operational foundation we've built over the past 6 months can support international growth without sacrificing quality or efficiency. I'd recommend proceeding with the London office as planned, with Dublin and Berlin following within 18 months. And the questions continued for another hour, but they felt less like an interrogation and more like a collaborative strategy session. These people weren't testing me, they were relying on my expertise to help them make important decisions about the company's future. After the board meeting, Margaret Chen caught up with me in the hallway. Amy, that was brilliant. Rebecca Patterson told me afterward that your strategic thinking reminded her of the best consultants she'd worked with at McKinsey, except with the advantage of actually understanding our business intimately. The compliment was gratifying, but what struck me most was how natural the whole experience had felt. 6 months ago, I'd been fighting for recognition from people who didn't value my contributions. Today, I was being praised by some of the most respected business leaders in Silicon Valley for work that felt like a natural extension of my skills and interests. Margaret, I have to tell you, this is exactly what I was hoping for when I made the leap from consulting to in-house strategy. Well, the feeling is mutual. Daniel and I were just discussing how much this role has evolved beyond what we originally envisioned. You've essentially become our chief operating officer in everything but title. The comment caught my attention. Is that something the company is considering formalizing? Margaret smiled mysteriously. That's a conversation you should have with Daniel next week. But Amy, I will say this, your impact here has been transformational, and we want to make sure your role reflects the value you're bringing to the organization. That afternoon, I was reviewing expansion budgets when my assistant knocked on my door. Amy, you have a visitor. Arthur Carter is here to see you. I looked up surprised. Arthur and I had exchanged a few polite emails over the past months, mostly related to client transition details, but we hadn't had any substantial contact since my final day at Alden Ventures. Please send him in. Arthur appeared in my doorway looking remarkably different from the last time I'd seen him. The stress lines around his eyes had deepened, and he carried himself with the slightly defeated posture of a man who'd learned some hard lessons about the consequences of poor decision-making. Amy, thank you for making time to see me. I know I'm probably the last person you expected to visit today. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, genuinely curious about what had brought him here. Arthur, it's good to see you. How are things at Alden Ventures? He settled into the chair with a heavy sigh. Honestly, we're still recovering from the aftermath of your departure. The West Coast division has stabilized somewhat, but we've never regained the momentum you'd built. I'm sorry to hear that. Amy, I didn't come here to relitigate the past or to ask for anything. I came because I owe you a more complete apology than the one I gave 6 months ago. I leaned back in my chair, intrigued by his serious tone. 6 months ago, I thought I understood what I'd lost when you left, Arthur continued. I knew you were talented. I knew you'd built strong client relationships, and I knew your departure would create some operational challenges. But I didn't understand the full scope of what your leadership had meant to our West Coast success. What changed your understanding? Arthur was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. We hired McKenna Strategic to conduct a post-mortem analysis of what went wrong. Their report was illuminating and humbling. McKenna Strategic, the same firm that had hired Marcus Serra and David Chen. The irony of Arthur paying my former team members to analyze his own failures was almost overwhelming. What did their analysis conclude? That you weren't just a good regional manager, you were a strategic leader who'd created systems, relationships, and culture that drove extraordinary performance. The report made it clear that losing you wasn't like losing an employee. It was like losing the intellectual architecture that made our West Coast operations successful. I absorbed this assessment thinking about the team I'd built and the relationships I'd cultivated over 3 years of intensive work. Arthur, I appreciate you sharing that feedback, but I have to ask, what are you hoping to accomplish with this conversation? He leaned forward, his expression becoming more earnest. Amy, I want you to know that I understand now what I failed to recognize then. The decision to promote Lily over you wasn't just unfair, it was catastrophically poor business judgment. I let family politics override merit, and it nearly destroyed everything you'd built. What happened with Lily? She's actually doing quite well in business development. She's talented and motivated, just not ready for senior leadership. My mistake wasn't promoting her, it was promoting her into a role she wasn't qualified for while passing over someone who clearly was. The acknowledgement was more complete than anything I'd expected from Arthur, and it provided a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was still seeking. Arthur, I'm glad you've gained that perspective, and I'm glad Lily found a role where she can succeed. Amy, there's something else I need to tell you. The board of directors asked me to extend a formal invitation for you to return to Alden Ventures as Executive Vice President of Strategic Operations with complete autonomy over West Coast operations and a pathway to partnership within 2 years. The offer hung in the air between us like a challenge. Arthur was essentially offering me everything I'd wanted 6 months ago, plus more authority and financial incentives than I'd ever imagined. That's a generous offer, Arthur. What prompted the board to approve it? The McKenna strategic report convinced them that bringing you back should be our highest priority. They've authorized me to match whatever compensation package Horizon Tech is providing, plus equity participation and a seat on the executive committee. I thought about the offer seriously, trying to imagine returning to Alden Ventures with the authority and recognition I'd originally sought. It would be vindication of the highest order, the company that had passed me over, now desperate to bring me back on my own terms. Arthur, I'm honored by the offer and I appreciate the board's confidence, but I'm not interested in returning to Alden Ventures. His face fell. Can I ask why? Is it the compensation, the authority structure? We're open to negotiating any aspect of the arrangement. It's not about money or titles, Arthur. It's about trust and culture. 6 months ago, I learned that family connections mattered more than performance at Alden Ventures. Even if you've changed your policies, I can't unlearn that lesson. Amy, I understand your concern, but the governance changes we've implemented would prevent that situation from happening again. External oversight, formal succession planning board input on all senior appointments. The systems are completely different now. Those are good changes, Arthur, and I'm sure they'll help future employees. But for me, the relationship has been fundamentally altered. I can't go back to working for a company where I've seen how quickly promises can be broken when family interests conflict with business judgment. Arthur was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing my rejection of what he'd probably assumed would be an irresistible offer. Amy, is there anything I could say or offer that would change your mind? I considered his question carefully, wanting to give him an honest and complete answer. Arthur, 6 months ago, coming back to Alden Ventures with full authority would have been a dream come true, but that was when I thought success meant earning recognition from people who'd initially rejected me. I've learned something important since then. Real success means finding situations where your value is recognized from the beginning, where you don't have to prove your worth over and over again. And you found that at Horizon Tech. I smiled, thinking about my presentation to the board that morning, about the strategic challenges I was tackling, about the culture of mutual respect and collaborative decision-making that defined every day at my new company. I found something better than that, Arthur. I found a place where my contributions matter, where strategic thinking is valued over political maneuvering, and where success is measured by results rather than relationships. Arthur stood slowly, the weight of defeat visible in his posture. Amy, I respect your decision even though I'm disappointed by it, but I want you to know that if you ever change your mind, the offer will remain open. I appreciate that, Arthur, and I hope Alden Ventures continues to recover and grow. Before I go, there's one more thing I wanted to tell you. Joseph and I had lunch last week, and he mentioned that you might be getting some exciting news soon about your role at Horizon Tech. I raised an eyebrow, curious about what Joseph might have shared with his father. Joseph sometimes knows things before I do. Arthur smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving. Well, whatever the news is, I want you to know that I couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished. You took a devastating professional setback and transformed it into a launching pad for even greater success. After Arthur left, I sat in my office thinking about his visit and what it represented. 6 months ago, an offer to return to Alden Ventures as executive vice president would have felt like the ultimate vindication. Today, it felt like an invitation to step backward into a situation I'd already outgrown. The transformation in my thinking was profound. I'd stopped defining success as earning recognition from people who'd initially undervalued me and started defining it as finding environments where my value was apparent from the beginning. At 5:30, Daniel Morrison appeared in my doorway with 2 glasses of champagne and the kind of smile that suggested important news. "Amy, do you have a few minutes? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." I gestured to the sitting area in my office, intrigued by the champagne and the ceremonial atmosphere Daniel was creating. "Amy, this morning's board presentation was exceptional, but it wasn't surprising. For 6 months, you've consistently exceeded every expectation we've had. Your strategic thinking, your operational expertise, your ability to build consensus and drive results, you've transformed how this company operates." "Daniel, I've had an incredible team to work with and complete support from leadership. That makes a huge difference. Which brings me to why I'm here. The board met in executive session after you left this morning, and we'd like to offer you a promotion to Chief Operating Officer with full authority over all operational functions and a seat on the executive team." The offer was everything Margaret had hinted at earlier, but hearing it formally from Daniel felt overwhelming in the best possible way. "Daniel, that's an incredible honor. I'm genuinely excited about the opportunity. There's more. The promotion comes with a significant equity stake and a compensation package that reflects the value you're bringing to the organization. But more importantly, it comes with complete authority to shape our operational strategy as we expand internationally." I accepted the champagne glass he offered, feeling a sense of professional fulfillment that had been missing throughout my career at Alden Ventures. "Daniel, I have to tell you, this conversation is happening on the same day that Arthur Carter visited to offer me a position as executive vice president at Alden Ventures." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Really? And how did you respond?" I told him I wasn't interested, that my future is here working with people who recognize value when they see it rather than after they've lost it. Daniel raised his glass. "To recognizing value and to building something extraordinary together, to new beginnings and better decisions." That evening, Joseph and I celebrated at the same restaurant where we'd toasted my departure from Alden Ventures 6 months earlier. The symmetry felt perfect. Another transition, another new beginning, another opportunity to choose my own path rather than waiting for others to determine my worth. "How does it feel to be Chief Operating Officer?" Joseph asked as we settled into our booth. "Terrifying and exhilarating, just like every other major decision I've made this year." "Are you glad you turned down my father's offer?" I thought about Arthur's visit, about the vindication his offer represented, and about the future I was choosing instead. Joseph, 6 months ago, I would have seen that offer as proof that I'd been right all along about my value. Today I see it as proof that I was right to leave. The fact that they only recognize my worth after losing me tells me everything I need to know about their priorities. "And you're confident about your decision to stay at Horizon Tech?" "Completely. Joseph, this promotion isn't about proving myself to people who initially rejected me. It's about growing into a role that was created specifically to utilize my strengths and experience. That's the difference between earning recognition and being recognized." 3 weeks later, I found myself back in the same conference room where Arthur had announced Lily's promotion 9 months earlier, but this time I was there as a guest of honor at Alden Ventures' annual awards dinner, receiving their Distinguished Alumni Award for Professional Achievement. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that had passed me over for promotion was now celebrating my success elsewhere. But I'd accepted the invitation because I wanted to close this chapter of my life gracefully, without bitterness or vindictiveness. Arthur introduced me to the assembled group of employees, clients, and industry partners with words that would have meant everything to me 9 months earlier. Amy Carter exemplifies the kind of strategic thinking and operational excellence that defines the best of our profession, he said from the podium. While we're disappointed that her success is being realized elsewhere, we're proud to have played a role in developing such an exceptional leader. When I approached the podium to accept the award, I could see familiar faces in the audience, former colleagues, current clients, industry contacts who'd watched this entire drama unfold over the past months. But I could also see new faces, people who knew me only through my work at Horizon Tech and my growing reputation as a strategic operations expert. Thank you for this recognition, I began. My time at Alden Ventures taught me invaluable lessons about building client relationships, developing operational systems, and leading teams through complex challenges. But perhaps most importantly, it taught me that professional growth requires the courage to pursue opportunities that align with your values, even when those opportunities require leaving your comfort zone. I paused, making eye contact with Arthur, who was sitting at the head table looking simultaneously proud and regretful. Success isn't about earning recognition from people who initially undervalued you, I continued. Success is about finding environments where your contributions are appreciated from the beginning, where trust is given rather than grudgingly earned, and where excellence is the expectation rather than the exception. The applause was polite but thoughtful, and I could see people processing my words and their implications for their own careers. To the talented professionals still building their careers at Alden Ventures, I want you to know that loyalty matters, but it should never be one-sided. The best organizations recognize and reward excellence consistently, not just when they're afraid of losing it. After the ceremony, I mingled with the crowd, accepting congratulations and catching up with former colleagues. The conversations were warm and professional, but I was struck by how much had changed in just 9 months. I was no longer trying to prove myself to these people, I was simply sharing my success with them. Lily approached me near the end of the evening, looking confident and poised in a way I hadn't seen during her difficult early months as regional director. Amy, congratulations on the COO promotion. I heard the news through industry contacts, and I wanted to tell you how happy I am for your success. Thank you, Lily. I heard you're doing excellent work in business development. She smiled genuinely. I am, and I love it. Amy, I wanted to thank you for the advice you gave me about finding my own path rather than trying to fill someone else's role. It made all the difference in how I approached my career development. I'm glad it was helpful. You're building exactly the kind of experience base that will serve you well in leadership roles when you're ready for them. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Arthur has suggested that I might be ready for a regional management role in a year or two, and I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to serve as an informal mentor as I prepare for that transition. The request was both surprising and touching. Lily was asking me to help her succeed in the kind of role I'd been denied, and she was doing it with complete acknowledgement of the history between us. Lily, I'd be honored to help however I can. You're approaching leadership development exactly the right way by building skills systematically rather than relying on titles to create credibility. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 9 months ago, I'd been a disappointed employee watching someone else receive the promotion I'd earned. Tonight, I was a successful executive being honored by the company that had initially undervalued me. But the most important transformation wasn't in my professional status, it was in my understanding of what success really meant. I'd stopped seeking validation from people who'd rejected me and started building relationships with people who recognized my value from the beginning. Joseph was waiting up when I got home, curious about how the evening had gone. So, how did it feel to be back at Alden Ventures as the guest of honor? Satisfying, but also strange. Joseph, I kept thinking about how desperately I wanted their recognition 9 months ago and how little it matters to me now. What's changed? I thought about the question as I changed out of my formal dress and into comfortable clothes. What's changed is that I've learned the difference between earning respect and demanding it. At Alden Ventures, I was constantly trying to prove I deserved recognition. At Horizon Tech, my value is assumed, and I'm given opportunities to demonstrate it rather than having to fight for the chance to do so. And you're happy with that distinction. More than happy. Joseph, for the first time in my career, I'm working for people who bet on my success rather than people I have to convince to take that bet. 6 months later, I was sitting in my corner office as Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Tech, reviewing expansion plans for our European operations when Margaret Chen knocked on my door. Amy, I have some interesting news. I just got off a call with Rebecca Patterson and she wanted me to pass along a message. Rebecca Patterson was now serving as chairman of our board and had become something of a mentor in my transition to senior executive leadership. What did she say? She said that 3 different venture capital firms have approached her about recruiting you for CEO positions at their portfolio companies. Apparently, your reputation as a turnaround specialist and growth strategist is spreading throughout Silicon Valley. The news was flattering, but not entirely surprising. Over the past year, I'd spoken at several industry conferences, published articles about operational strategy, and built a network of relationships that extended far beyond Horizon Tech. Margaret, I hope you told her I'm not interested in leaving. I did, but she wanted me to ask if you'd be open to serving on boards of directors for other companies. She thinks your operational expertise would be valuable to early-stage companies that are scaling rapidly. The idea of board service was intriguing, an opportunity to share my experience with other organizations while continuing to grow my own role at Horizon Tech. That's something I'd definitely consider. What kind of time commitment are we talking about? Typically 1 or 2 board meetings per month, plus occasional strategic consulting on specific challenges. Rebecca thinks you could easily handle 2 or 3 board positions without affecting your responsibilities here. As Margaret left my office, I sat back in my chair and marveled at how completely my professional life had transformed. 18 months ago, I'd been fighting for recognition from a single employer who didn't appreciate my contributions. Today, I was fielding multiple opportunities from organizations that actively sought my expertise. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been without challenges. But every difficult decision, every moment of uncertainty, every leap of faith had contributed to building the career I'd always wanted but hadn't known how to pursue. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Marcus Webb, my former colleague who'd followed me out of Alden Ventures and was now a partner at McKenna Strategic. Amy, he wrote, I wanted you to know that McKenna Strategic just landed the consulting contract for Alden Ventures' East Coast operations. Apparently, Arthur was so impressed with our West Coast work that he decided to expand our relationship. I thought you'd appreciate the irony Arthur is now paying your former team to fix problems in other parts of his company. I smiled at the message, thinking about the strange circular journey that had brought my former team back into Arthur's orbit, but this time as external consultants rather than internal employees. The irony was indeed rich. Arthur had lost his best performers through poor decision-making, hired them back as expensive consultants, and was now expanding their role within his organization. It was a perfect illustration of why leadership decisions have long-term consequences that extend far beyond their immediate impact. But more than irony, Marcus's message represented something profound about the business world and the importance of maintaining professional relationships even after difficult endings. The people whose careers had been disrupted by Arthur's decision hadn't disappeared. They'd found new opportunities, built new successes, and positioned themselves to influence the very organization that had initially undervalued them. That evening, as I sat on my deck overlooking San Francisco Bay, I thought about the journey that had begun with Arthur's devastating announcement 18 months earlier. Every assumption I'd held about loyalty, career advancement, and professional recognition had been challenged and ultimately transformed. I'd learned that loyalty without respect is servitude, that recognition earned through persistence is less valuable than recognition given freely, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from a situation that doesn't serve your interests. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that success isn't about proving your worth to people who initially rejected you. It's about finding environments where your value is recognized, respected, and rewarded from the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Joseph. Working late again. Should I save dinner? I looked at my watch, surprised to discover it was nearly 8 o'clock. The time had passed quickly as I'd reviewed strategic plans, responded to board inquiries, and prepared for tomorrow's executive team meeting. On my way home now, I texted back. And yes, I'm working late, but for the first time in my career, it feels like choice rather than obligation. As I drove home through the city I'd come to love, I reflected on the woman I'd become through this journey. 18 months ago, I'd been someone who sought validation from others, who measured success by external recognition, who believed that loyalty and hard work would inevitably be rewarded. Today, I was someone who created her own opportunities, who defined success by internal satisfaction, who understood that respect must be mutual to be meaningful. The transformation hadn't just changed my career, it had changed my understanding of what it meant to build a life of purpose and fulfillment. Sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is the gift of disillusionment because it forces you to see clearly what you've been unable or unwilling to acknowledge. Arthur's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been liberating. It had freed me from the illusion that success meant earning approval from people who didn't value my contributions, and it had opened my eyes to possibilities I'd been too focused to see. Tonight, as I pulled into my driveway and saw Joseph waiting for me with wine and dinner, I felt a contentment that had nothing to do with titles or recognition or external validation. I felt the satisfaction that comes from knowing your worth, choosing your path, and building something meaningful with people who appreciate what you bring to the table. It had been a long journey from that devastating morning when Arthur announced Lily's promotion, but every step had been necessary to bring me to this moment of clarity and purpose. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away from a fight that was rigged from the beginning and build something better with people who recognize your value from the start. I was living proof that success isn't about convincing people to change their minds about you. It's about finding people who never doubted your worth in the first place.